30 years ago, back in the early 90s, mountain bike suspension was a relatively new concept, and on the path to the modern bikes we have today, the Slingshot was born. Though this is not a custom bike, this is not a prototype or experimental bike, you could buy this, and not only that, it was pretty high-end at the time. Slingshot Bikes had a professional race team that participated in cross-country and downhill on this same bike. And as you can see where the down tube is supposed to be, there's a cable attached with a cotter pin and a spring. And then up here where the top tube meets the seat tube, there's this little dog bone flexy thing. And that was their idea of suspension. And it worked. According to one of the racers I spoke to, this bike was thought up in the 70s, or the concept was. One of the founders of Slingshot was riding around a mini bike, like a motorized little bike, and the down tube snapped. And the bike stayed together because there were other tubes still intact, and he was just feeling it and saying, hey, maybe it would be a good idea to engineer something like this, but less sketchy. Now in forums, I've seen people refer to this as a dog bone, a flex board. It's actually called a flex plate, and it's made by 3M. And it is the point on this bike that actually flexes and creates the compliance that gives it a smooth ride. Now, they engineered it to just flex up and down, but it actually flexes in pretty much every direction. If you have a worn out one of these, it can get really, really sketchy, and so people would replace them back in the day. It looks like it's attached with this quick release skewer and these bolts, but it's actually epoxied into the bike, and changing it out requires scraping out the old one, getting all the old pieces of epoxy out of the frame, and then I suspect it would be really hard to find one of these in 2022. Now, it speaks to the era that this bike was made in, that there is a quick release to take the entire bike apart, but there is no quick release on the seat clamp. That's pretty hilarious, but back then, there was really no difference between cross-country and downhill, and so this bike handled it all. So yeah, for its day, this bike was able to take anything you threw at it, but I was advised to kind of go easy on it. For one, it's got this 30-year-old flex plate that may have experienced some fatigue over the years, and also some other strange parts that really date it. For example, this composite stem. What kind of composite it is, I don't know. It might have some carbon involved, might have experienced fatigue as well. But even sketchier than the 30-year-old composite stem are the carbon bars. These would have been considered very new and high-end in the 1990s. And we just didn't do carbon as well as we do now. Back then, anything made of carbon looked like carbon fiber, like they showed the weave in it because it was a novelty and you wanted to show it off. You didn't want to spend all that money on a carbon part and people not realize that it was carbon. And it also kind of weakened a little bit over time. Not the carbon itself, but whatever kind of material was holding it together. And so when I first stepped on this bike to take it for a ride, I was a little bit nervous, but I'm pretty impressed how it's been performing. This bike actually feels really good for a 90s bike with just the suspension fork. Bikes from this era aren't even as mountain bike as a modern gravel bike is. Whew. Oh, I can feel the flexing for sure. Now, I have ridden quite a few 90s mountain bikes, and I have been fortunate enough to ride good examples of 90s mountain bikes. This ranks near the top. It could be because it has so many good high-end components on it, or it could be because of that compliance. It's actually really, really smooth. As far as examples of a working Slingshot bike, this is about as good as it gets, aside from the mismatched tires and the platform pedals that I threw on it. It's pretty period correct and everything is working really nice. It climbs like a dream and it feels really good at speed when you're going over chatter. The really technical stuff is when it shows its age. Partially because the wheels are so small, the suspension doesn't have a lot of travel, the chain drops all the time, the derailleurs didn't have clutches back then, but there are some really good things about how old it is. First of all, it's got an ancient 3x9 drivetrain that's still really smooth, and for climbing, it's kind of great. Also, I find the seating position on these older mountain bikes really comfortable for climbing, maybe not so much for going downhill on something really steep. And it's pretty light. This bike's made of steel. Back in the early 90s, most race bikes were made of steel. And it's done very well. It would be rare to see a steel tube that was shaped like this top tube. The bike is missing a down tube, so there's some weight savings right there. And not only does this bike have all this compliance built into it, but steel also has very good vibration damping qualities. And so when you're riding this bike where you should, that is to say, smoothish, flowy terrain, it just has a ride quality that you can't get today. Now, would I take this bike out on a ride just for the heck of it? Yeah, I think so. But it would be a novelty ride, and it would be a novelty ride for a lot of reasons. For one, all the limitations that I mentioned before of a 90s bike. The geometry was more similar to a road bike than a modern day mountain bike. The integrity of some of the parts is sort of questionable, and so I can't really let loose on it. And rim brakes are something else. Now, I'm not a very big fan of rim brakes. If you are old enough to remember rim brakes being the only option, as opposed to disc brakes, you know they're just not as smooth, they're not as reliable, but these were some of the best rim brakes that you could have gotten at the time. And they feel it, they feel very good, plenty of stopping power. It's also got a RockShox Indy. In the early 90s, when they were racing these things professionally, it would have probably just had a rigid steel fork, but a lot of people that built these a few years later, they did add suspension forks. Now, I was lucky enough to talk to a couple of racers who raced these professionally, and this flex point would have offered more compliance in the rear than it would have in the front. What it would have been called is a unified rear triangle. So this piece over here, the rear triangle, it's all one piece. Your crankset and your rear wheel are attached to that same piece. Now, if you look at a modern full suspension mountain bike, most of the time, your crankset and your rear wheel are attached to two different pieces. And there's a reason we do it like that now. There are situations where this bike is just flexing all over the place, and the platform that you're standing on is kind of separate from the handlebars, and so the bike can twist in some pretty weird ways. Even today, there are bikes that have technology that are sort of like this. There's some gravel bikes that have flex points, and honestly, that's what this bike would probably be best for in 2022, be riding on a dirt road or someplace where there are a lot of small bumps in quick succession. This excels at that better than a lot of bikes today do. And so this Slingshot bike is an excellent example of experimental technology that didn't really stand the test of time, but made a big splash while it was here. This is the Structure SCW SCW1, and if you couldn't tell by looking at it, it's a mountain bike. Now, if you're wondering what all this stuff is, I'm gonna explain it, and actually, the company refers to this linkage as WTF. That stands for without telescoping fork. Let's talk about that. So this is a standard modern full suspension mountain bike, and as you can see on the front, there is a telescoping fork. This is not new. Telescoping forks have actually existed for over 100 years, not specifically for mountain biking. They've gotten way, way better, but yeah, of course, the original design was for a motorcycle. Now, the rear of a modern mountain bike has linkage and rocker arms and a shock, and that is what enables the rear of the bike to soak up bumps. And so they're two different systems, this one, of course, being much more modern than the telescoping fork. Now, the way a telescoping fork works is you have two stanchions that plunge into a wiper seal, and then with either air pressure or a big spring, the fork returns to its initial position after it soaks up a bump. Now, on the Structure, instead of having linkage in the rear and a telescoping fork on the front, there's just linkage throughout the entire bike, and that provides some certain advantages from an engineering standpoint. You can change where the rocker arm is, the amount of pivot points, and the bike feels completely different when you're pedaling. It feels completely different when you go off of jumps. Why not do that on the front of the bike? And that's exactly what Structure has done. And supposedly, it's got a really smooth ride. And so we're here on the weekend of Bentonville Bike Fest in Bentonville, Arkansas, and we're surrounded by mountain bike trails in every direction. Let's take this thing out and see how it feels. Okay, so I've ridden the Structure SCW1, and I have some thoughts, one of which I take no pleasure in sharing with you. But before I share any of these thoughts, you have to take them all with a grain of salt, because I only spent about 3 hours on this bike. Mike Levy spent 6 months on this bike, and I'm gonna link to his review below because it's much more in-depth than this one. Also, I didn't get it from the company, I got it from an individual here in Bentonville, and it looks like it was put through its paces and probably laid down on its side through a rock garden a couple of times. Furthermore, this is a size medium and I'm deep in the small category, and so this bike is way too big for me, but I rode it anyway, and I do have some thoughts. The first of which has to do with the front suspension, which is of course the hallmark of this bike. It's the plushest suspension I've ever felt in my entire life, hands down, especially at the top of the stroke. Now, the best way I could describe it is it feels like the front tire is at 12 PSI without any of the disadvantages of a tire being at 12 PSI. It is truly cushy. It tracks amazingly well. It feels really good, and overall, I just had a blast in this bike today. Now let's talk about the rear linkage, because the front is a totally new design. When you're designing rear linkage, you're dodging patents, and so you don't have as much freedom, and it shows. It's just not as good as the front. On technical climbs, you can kind of feel it jump around a little bit, and just overall, when you're going down the trail, it's just not as plush as the front, but it's fine. So in a typical bike review, people will remark about how a bike feels when you're braking, right? Is it divey? Does it feel sort of swirly when you're braking? This bike feels amazing when you're braking, and for a very specific reason. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So on a conventional mountain bike with a telescoping fork, you can see the fork is not perfectly straight up and down. It's not perpendicular to the ground. It's raked out a little bit, and that provides a little bit of stability, especially when you're riding through some jank. But when you apply your brakes, all your weight shifts forwards, and what tends to happen is the fork compresses. It actually makes your head tube angle steeper, which in theory would make the bike less stable. Now, it's not a big deal. It only steepens by a little bit, and companies factor this in when they're choosing what head tube angle and just overall geometry the bike's gonna have. But the Structure actually does the opposite. Now, like I said, they designed this from scratch, and so they can make the linkage behave in any way they want through engineering. And so what they engineered it to do is actually slacken under hard braking. So whether you're going off a drop and trying to stick a landing, or whether you're braking really hard, this thing actually gets more stable and you can feel it. It's a really, really good feature. So you might be wondering, why does designing a front end like this actually make the bike feel smoother? And the answer is there's just less friction. The linkage is rotating on cartridge bearings instead of sliding past a seal. That is naturally gonna be smoother, but isn't it sliding past the seal? There's a shock right over here, and there's a wiper seal in it, but there's only one wiper seal, and you have the leverage of the linkage working to your advantage, and so it's less noticeable. Now, the company claims there's another advantage in terms of maintenance. You don't have to service a suspension fork, you just have to service linkage. That's kind of subjective. I would rather service a suspension fork than 1, 2, 3, 4, 15, 16, 17. At least 18 cartridge bearings? That sounds like an overhaul. It is true that servicing two identical shocks is easier than servicing a shock and a suspension fork, because you can just order the same service kit. You only have to learn how to service one thing. They're identical. You have one bottle of fluids. It does sort of make things simpler in that regard. And so it does really appear to be true that this design has some big advantages. So why don't we see them everywhere? Why isn't every racer on one of these? Well, there are a few reasons. First of all, it looks different, and mountain biking beauty standards are pretty narrow. Everybody wants a bike that looks like a bike. I happen to think this is beautiful, but I also have a soft spot for ballsy engineering decisions. First of all, as of this video, you're gonna have to spend a minimum of $7,000 to get this. That's not very far out of line at all for a high-end enduro bike, but you're not gonna have much luck finding a demo on one of these things. You're gonna have to just purchase it sight unseen. I've been to all the big festivals and I've never seen one of these things available for demo. And so if you buy one of these, you're taking a risk. Also, as of the time of recording, it's not available in small and it's not available in extra large. It's just medium and large. And so I would be unable to purchase one of these that actually fit me. Two, where do you put a water bottle on this? There's no water bottle cage mount that I can see. Maybe that could be used as one. Yeah, you're gonna have to wear a backpack or something if you wanna drink water on this thing. And in this day and age, that's kind of a big deal. Even bikes that don't have optimal water bottle storage get dinged for it. It's also not very light. I believe this is about 35 pounds. I don't have a scale with me, I'm traveling, but this is not a light bike. That doesn't seem to matter that much. I didn't have any problem climbing with it, although I didn't climb all day on it. More and more, we're starting to realize that weight isn't everything, but it is true that it's heavier than a conventional mountain bike with a telescoping fork. There are also limited options. There are several colorways and component choices, but this is it. All the bikes come with the same travel, kind of the same design. Now, the next thing I have to say, I take no pleasure in telling you, and this is unique to my experience, I think I broke this thing. The fork does appear to be cracked, and we looked over the footage, and this morning, it wasn't. It had to have happened when I was riding the bike. And if you push these little rubber knock blocks up, you can see it's definitely not something I should be riding right now. Now, to be clear, this bike was put through its paces before I took it, and so I don't know whether somebody started that, and I don't think it's necessarily a flaw in the design, because I've seen huge dudes going down the trail on these. They've been around for a while. I'm not the first person to ride one, but this fork has gotta be defective. And so I'm gonna offer to take care of this for the individual that lent it to me, but I don't think it's gonna be a problem because this would definitely fall under their warranty. And so if you had one of these bikes and the fork cracked, you would get another one from the company. Okay, future Seth here from the following week. The bike has made it back to the powers that be, and Structure has commented on it. They were actually really cool. They were happy I tested the bike, they were happy I enjoyed it, and they were happy I didn't get hurt because that was a pre-production fork. They've had another one crack, and so they weren't very surprised about it. It's been a long time since they totally changed the carbon layup, and they have not had any fail. And so if you were to buy one of these today, it would not have the same fork I rode on it. It would be a much beefier one that has since had no failures. I think that's a really cool response from a small company that could feel really threatened by this. They didn't blame it on me. They didn't get angry. They just said, hey, here's the deal. We're glad everybody's okay. And yeah, we'd love for you to ride the next one. So I had a ton of fun riding the Structure Cycleworks SCW1. It's really unfortunate about the fork. Now, with all that being said, I have a soft spot for engineering decisions like this, for experimentation, for new things. That's what pushes this forwards. This is something that brings joy to people. Mountain biking, anything that makes it feel better, feel different. That gives us another option, and I'm all for it. Some years back, I bought a Mongoose Dolomite fat bike from Walmart. I needed something I could pedal in the sand to attempt to surf the tsunami created by the displacement of a cruise ship leaving port. That didn't end up working out so well, and I was left with a bike that was kind of out of warranty, and so I gave it to this guy, Raven, who turned it into a tall bike. Now, some people call these double-decker bikes because oftentimes you build them out of two bikes welded on top of one another. If you've never had the experience of riding a tall bike, you would be surprised how fun it is. But while I do love tall bikes and I do have a little bit of experience riding them, I've never built one myself. And so we have two bikes here today that we're gonna butcher. And so let's rip these bikes apart and see if we can build a tall bike by the end of the week. There's lots of different ways we can build this, but the way I'm gonna do it is run a chain down to the bottom bike. And so this bottom bracket is gonna have to be right over here. I'm gonna extend the steerer tube like that. I'm as surprised as you are, they fit together. So now I have to clean the paint off of the frames where they're gonna get welded, line them up, and this is where I can really screw up because if the angle is wrong, the bearings and the headset are not really gonna be right. It should stay straight. Before we get to even building the bike, I have to get the steering working. This is an old style threaded steerer tube. And so you have threads up here and the length of it is very crucial. And so I have to try and extend this tube all the way through and make sure it steers. Once we've got all that figured out, we can take it back apart, paint it, and then start building a bike. Yeah, we could probably work with that. How did that get so long? I cannot stress enough how much this is not a tutorial. So the next step is clean up this frame really, really well, pull off all the stickers, sand it down, and prime it so we can paint it, and then we can build ourselves a bike. I've been prepping this frame for way too long. It's time to just paint it and make it work. If I had all week, I would just, yeah. Last night I woke up in a cold sweat, and all I could think about was, will the lower headset cup fit over the steerer tube? I think I found something. I was just looking around the shop and I have this piece of pipe here that's not light, actually. Not quite there. Oh yeah. Just where we want it. So before we install the fork, we gotta press in these here headset cups, only my press is not long enough. So we're gonna do it BMX style. Ooh, that's cutting it close. Now for the complicated part, the drivetrain. I'm gonna install both cranksets and run a chain from the top bottom bracket down to the bottom one, and then another one to the drivetrain. I think it's gonna look cool, I think it's gonna work great, and we should have really good shifting. Herein lies the reason why we need the bottom bracket mounted chain tensioner. We can adjust the length of the chain, but it's never gonna be perfect. It's always gonna flop around. This particular chain tensioner stays in place with pressure. You just screw in the bottom bracket cup over it, and now we're gonna tap it into place. Yeah, this is not a high performance bicycle. I'm not too worried. And that's perfect. It's essentially gonna be a reduction gear. It's gonna make the gearing of the bike lower, and that's okay, because I'm not gonna go very fast. We could change it in the future. So now the beauty of this is we can just now put a derailleur on the back. At the bottom, it just works like a normal bicycle. On the center chain ring, this chain actually rubs on this chain. So I'm gonna have to put this on the smallest ring in order for this to work. So this is gonna be a serious gear reduction. Here I have a quill stem to threadless conversion so that we have more options for stems and handlebars. Now we're talking. Okay. So we got no brakes or gears yet, but we can sort of test this. I guess I can just. Oh man, it feels so cool. All right, so let's see. All right, she works. All right, let's turn this into a bike. One really long shift housing coming right up. So as it turns out, the actual shifter cable is more than long enough for this. It's actually not that long of a distance, not much longer than just a big enduro bike. Almost done. Needs 4 bottle cages. I want to ride it, but I think first we need to stare at it. So I want to get into some sketchy stuff with this bike, but we've got to ramp it up because I don't know how strong it is. I'm not known as like the world's greatest welder. So let's start by just riding it around, making sure everything works. It's easy. The brakes work nice. It's maneuverable. Look at the turning radius on this thing. It just feels so cool being up this high. Woo! Okay, so the problem is, when I try to pedal uphill, it wheelies. Probably not going to do any more of that. So the reason this bike wants to loop out backwards is because look at the seat tube, how much it slants back. I'm like almost over the center of the rear wheel. And that's something to consider when building one of these. Always wanted to build a tall bike, and I always wanted to do it myself. There's any number of people I could have reached out to with more tools and experience that could have helped me get this right on the first shot, but the mistakes and the learning experiences were too tantalizing, and so I committed to doing this all by myself. To get this on the first shot, I'm pretty satisfied. For all you fabricators out there, I apologize for the confusion and pain and sorrow that you experience while watching me do this, but I had fun. This is the Lefty Ocho, the 8th iteration of Cannondale's one-legged, upside-down suspension fork. It came to the market 23 years ago. It's seen plenty of World Cups, and it has a fiercely loyal following, yet it is still extremely weird. Every day, someone sees a Lefty in the wild for their first time, and they say, how does that not snap in half? We'll talk about that today, as well as some of the Lefty's surprising advantages over two-legged suspension forks. We'll also discuss why the Lefty is still relatively uncommon and weird. Welcome back to Berm Peak. I'm Seth, and today we're gonna be doing something a little bit different, but kind of the same. Indeed, the Lefty stands alone as the weird bike product to rule them all because it has stayed weird. Think about saddles with holes in the middle. When those first started becoming popular, it probably looked a little bit weird. I know the first time I saw it, I thought it was weird, but now, what saddle doesn't have some kind of hole or pressure relief zone? Now, the other unfortunate future for weird bike products is they disappear because they were too weird or they didn't catch on. The Lefty stands alone as the only bike product that has been around for 23 years and hasn't become normal. It's still weird. The first time anybody sees it, they just can't even believe it's physically possible. Even if you own a Lefty, even if you live someplace where you see Lefties every single day, it's still only got one leg. But that's not the only thing that's weird about it, far from it. So it's also an upside down fork in that the upper is this big tube over here and the stanchion is down at the bottom. Now, the other strange thing about the Lefty is that you can access the entire wheel. If you want to change the tire, you actually don't have to take the wheel off the bike. There's nothing blocking it, but you have to remove the brake caliper. Now, the Lefties of old were actually a pretty big pain. You have to unbolt the caliper just like you were removing it. The new one, the Ocho, it has this little quick release lever over here, and you can just pop the caliper off if you want to remove the wheel. So now with the front wheel off, you can see this kind of spectacle over here. Probably looks like a whole bunch of components, but it's actually one piece of metal. From here, all the way up to the stanchion, up to the mechanism that's inside of the upper, it's all one forged piece of metal. And indeed, that is one of the most expensive parts of the fork to manufacture. And the reason that has to be done is because this has to support a tremendous amount of force. Now, the major downside to this is that to have a Lefty, you need to have a hub that's compatible with it, and only a few people make it. And so yeah, if you have an old set of cross-country wheels around and you get a new bike with a Lefty, you can't use those old wheels without changing out the hub. But if you think that's weird, the old Lefty, like every single version before this, was dual crown. So the crown, this part of the fork, there was two of them. There was one of them on top of the head tube, like a downhill bike. And these are mainly cross-country forks. This has 110 millimeters of travel. So you had a bunch of cross-country bikes with dual crown forks. That's like taking a Japanese tuner car and putting a front loader on it. Another advantage that I noticed this morning is that if you put this on a tailgate, it fits really, really nice. The wheel goes flat up against the car and the tire touches and the down tube touches. There's no part of the fork resting on the tailgate pad or anything like that. I suspect that very few Lefty owners have discovered this advantage while securing their bike to the rack on their Porsche Cayenne. So the fact that the Lefty looks so different from its competitors seems like Cannondale must have done this for marketing. But actually, this design has a lot of characteristics that make it perform differently and in a lot of ways better than some of the competition. Now, in the mid-90s, they had a suspension system that was above the fork and below the head tube. There was like a little shock boot right here in the center, and indeed, the Lefty contains a few remnants from the Headshock. The main ones being a keyed stanchion and needle bearings. So I will now explain to you what both of those are. So here you can see two pipes that kind of fit inside of each other, just like the upper and the stanchion on the Lefty. And so you might ask yourself, how is that stanchion staying straight? It's a cylinder, it should just be spinning around, but actually up inside the upper, it's shaped like a triangle. It can only fit in one way and it can't rotate. But that's not the only weird thing about it. So in a two-legged fork, you have two stanchions, and the fact that there are two of them pressed into the same crown keeps them from rotating. Lefty uses a keyed stanchion that keeps it from rotating, but there's another key difference. See, the stanchion passes through a rubber wiper seal in the lower, and so when you get a typical fork going, it has to overcome that initial stiction in order to start moving. A Lefty uses needle bearings, and what a needle bearing is, it's like a cylindrical bearing. It's actually rolling against something instead of sliding against something. It doesn't have to overcome the same stiction that a typical two-legged fork does, and some people say that it gives a smoother ride. Now, I spent the morning riding this around, and it was remarkably smooth. It's definitely a different feeling from any other fork I've ever ridden. Now, the craziest part about it is that it's stiff. It turns out that in its class, like high-end cross-country forks, it is the stiffest one that you can buy. Now, it's not stiff because it has one leg, it's stiff because it's upside down. On the Lefty, the crown and the upper are all one piece. So you don't have a junction until you get down here, and then because the fork is not like pressed up against some plastic and wiper seals, there's basically no play anywhere. It's all one big rigid piece. Not to mention that the part of the fork that would have play in it is at the bottom where there is less leverage. So we've established that the Lefty is really weird, and we've talked a little bit about how it works. But for it to remain weird all this time, it has to be good enough where people keep buying it, and then there has to be something about it that keeps everybody from buying it. Why are these still relatively uncommon? It is $1,600. It's a lot of money. Even the alloy version of this is $1,000, and compared to the competition, it's just not as good of a value. And so despite the very real advantages of the Lefty, there are several reasons why you don't just see them everywhere. So perhaps the biggest reason, bigger than the price, is that up until recently, Lefties only worked on Cannondale bicycles. Now, the Lefty Ocho will fit on just about any bike with a tapered head tube. And so you're starting to see them pop up on other XC bikes here and there. Not only do you need this expensive fork, but you also have to lace your rim onto a new proprietary hub that also costs money. And then there's servicing it. So if you already have a two-legged fork and you've been servicing it, you likely have a lot of fluids and tools and parts laying around. None of those are gonna work on your Lefty. You basically have to start from scratch. Not only that, but Cannondale is not gonna help you. So while other fork manufacturers have service manuals and tech support, Cannondale is kind of dealer only. They don't really help consumers service their forks. Now, to be clear, they don't care if you do, and you can get the parts and you can find tutorials online. It's not gonna void your warranty to do a 100-hour fork service. But for people who really like to service everything on their own bike, a Lefty is probably gonna be their last choice. But most Lefty owners don't care. The type of customer that drops their Lefty off for service is best not distracted with such things. I, for one, do not want my anesthesiologist thinking about the roller bearings on their Lefty Ocho. I mean, for God's sake, they named the bike the Scalpel. It's not like these people can't service the fork. They just don't care. They can't be bothered with it. They're gonna drop it off and then go do cosmetic surgery on somebody's knee or something. Now it's worth noting that if you dig deep enough in most suspension products, you're gonna find something that the manufacturer doesn't want you dicking with. But the reasons you might decide against the Lefty go beyond the price and service. At least once every ride, somebody's gonna say, "Hey, your fork's missing a leg." And they're gonna think they're the only person that's ever come up with that, and it's gonna start to get annoying. Not to mention, it screams cross country. It just shouts it from the mountaintops. But people still buy the Lefty. Lots of people still buy it, and they're fiercely loyal. There are huge fans out there of this fork, and to be honest, I can kind of see why. It's really different, and it feels good. When you're going really fast through chattery terrain, it is smooth, and it is undeniably stiff. You can definitely feel it, and that's a really good characteristic for any part on a cross-country bike. And so it's the very real benefits and advantages of the Lefty that have made it last for this long through 8 iterations. But because of its cost and all those quirks, it has remained a niche product that's still weird. Over a century ago, this bicycle would have been considered very old. This Wolf American was made in 1897, and despite that fact, it looks pretty much exactly like the bicycles of today. All the parts are there. You got your bottom bracket, your chain, your front sprocket, rear sprocket. Aside from minor differences like wooden rims, we haven't had to change very much on bicycles since. Yet when this bike was sold, it would have been referred to as a safety bicycle. Usually when something's called that, its predecessor was sketchy. Well, that would be this. The high wheel, otherwise known as the Penny Farthing, rose to prominence in the 1860s, and yes, it was so sketchy that its successor was called the safety bicycle, and today, we're gonna talk all about it. Now, this particular bicycle does resemble what you would have seen in the 1880s, although it is a reproduction made in the 1960s. But aside from the headset and a few other odds and ends, this is mostly what it would have looked like, right down to the solid rubber tires. Today I want to show you all about the Penny Farthing. I want to ride one, but this one's too big for me to ride, and so let me show you mine. So this is my Penny Farthing, and as you can see, it's more my size, which is important because your inseam places a hard limit on the diameter of the wheel. For example, Sam Pilgrim could ride a much bigger high wheel than I can. This is also completely modernized. It has pneumatic tires, a welded frame, much better bearings, and it's also lighter and more durable. It's also a heck of a lot cheaper. Back in the 1860s, a Penny Farthing would have cost you about $5 grand if we adjust for inflation. That's many times what a horse would have cost back then, and this provides nowhere near the utility of a horse. A horse can pull a cart, can navigate any type of terrain. A Penny Farthing could kind of be used for recreation or to get around flat city streets, and that's mainly what they were used for back then. It was a recreational activity for the wealthy. These would have been handmade, sometimes specific to the size of the rider, because as I said, they're not all that adjustable. Yes, there were other velocipedes that preceded the Penny Farthing, none of them that reached the prominence that this did, and in fact, they called this an ordinary bicycle in its heyday. Actually, ordinary bicycle, because it wasn't until after the safety bicycle had largely replaced the Penny Farthing that bicycle journalists and enthusiasts needed a term to differentiate it, and so they called it the high wheel or the Penny Farthing. Now, even if the Penny Farthing would have been made affordable back in those days, there are a lot of reasons to assume that it would not have grown in popularity the way the safety bicycle did. For one, you wouldn't have seen a lot of women riding these because they always had skirts on and they would have been up really high, and I needn't explain the rest. The skirt could also get wrapped up in the front wheel, which would be bad. Not only that, but all of these were fixed gear. They didn't have brakes, and the crankset just moves with the wheel, and so if you wanted to slow down, you would put back pressure on the pedals like you would on a fixed gear or track bike. Except on a Penny Farthing, if you put too much back pressure on the pedals, it'll actually lift the back end up and send you over the handlebars, and then you break your collarbone and get surgery while biting down on a block of wood because it was the 1800s. And so rather than trying to stop the thing, you'd be better off attempting an evasive maneuver on the least maneuverable bike ever made. I mean, as you steer, your legs have to move with the crank set. And so it's not like you can turn really sharp on this thing. Now, there are people in modern times that race these, and those races are gnarly. I mean, even if they put brakes on these, you'd either have a rear brake that did nothing or a front brake that made the bike flip over forwards. Even in the 1800s, when a fish hook was a suitable children's toy, people were like, I'm not getting on that thing. Sketchiness aside, the Penny Farthing's actually very interesting, and there are a few things about its construction that make it better than a lot of modern bikes. Let's start with the similarities between the Penny Farthing and the Unicycle. So I've never done a deep dive into unicycles. I have no idea who invented them, but I would imagine they took the fork out of a Penny Farthing and stuck a seat on top of it, because that's pretty much all a unicycle is. You can see that the wheel on both a unicycle or a Penny Farthing use exactly the same hub, and then the cranks and pedals are attached to it. That's the entire extent of the drivetrain. There's no chain, there's no sprocket, there's no freewheel. It's like pretty much the most reliable cycling apparatus you can make besides a unicycle. Now, not only is this more mechanically sound than a safety bicycle, but it's also got a huge wheel, which would have soaked up a lot of the bumps in the bad roads that they had back in the 1800s. And that was one of the main benefits of the Penny Farthing when it rose to popularity, was that big wheel size. Its predecessor, the Bone Shaker, they had these big adult balance bikes called dandy horses. Those would have only been good on the smoothest of pathways. It wasn't until much later on that you started seeing pneumatic tires, which were a huge benefit in terms of ride quality. Despite the benefits of that larger wheel size, roads back then were pretty bad, and so you would have taken whatever comfort you could get. That was pretty much only in the saddle. The saddles were flexy, they had springs in the rear, and some of them are quite beautiful. Again, everything back then was kind of made by hand in a shop, and so it had character and it was just cool. And so as these rose in popularity and you kind of saw them around in every city, it became more apparent to the general public what the benefits were. I mean, you could cover a ton of ground, you didn't have to feed it. It must have looked like a lot of fun. And so when a safer, more practical alternative was introduced, the safety bicycle, it's pretty obvious why it just blew up and pretty much took over everything. But back in the Penny Farthing's heyday, this is what bicycle enthusiasts considered an ordinary bicycle. This was what they were used to. And when the safety bicycle was invented, I wish I could go back to that year and look at the Pink Bike comments. They're actually calling it a safety bicycle? Yeah, let's just sterilize everything. What's next? They're gonna put brakes on it? Now this thing is seriously fun. Like, I really enjoy riding it. It's a completely different feeling. Definitely a novelty. And I have shown you all my novelty bikes in a different video. The swing bike, the tall bike, the half bike. This is another one I like riding, and I can't believe I never had one sooner. I mean, it's really a different feeling. Now, one benefit of this Penny Farthing, without question, it is supremely comfortable. I could do this all day. It doesn't take any energy. The seat's really comfortable. You're sort of reclined. If I were relying on this to get to work and I had to go up and down hills and over terrible roads and avoiding people, I suspect it would lose its novelty fairly quickly. Yeah, these are pretty bad for climbing hills, even really small hills. You can tell by how it is. You're actually pushing the wheel in the direction that you are pedaling. So you pedal with your right foot and you are moving the wheel left. You pedal with your left foot and you're moving the wheel right. And to counteract it, you're pulling on the handlebars. You can knock them right out of alignment. I don't know if that's a problem unique to my Penny Farthing, but quill stems are easy to knock out of alignment. And back in the 1800s, this wasn't even as advanced. As for its performance on mountain bike trails, okay. The 32-inch wheel is actually kind of good, but there's this little tiny wheel in the back. Oh, whoa. Not nearly as bad as I thought it would be. Punchy little climb. Oh, no prayer. Okay. All right, let's see if I can get up enough momentum here. Ugh. So if for whatever reason I had no choice but to use bikes from my freak bike fleet to get to work, this would actually rank below several other bikes. Even for a novelty bike, it's impractical. Yet, at one point in history, this was the predominant means of two-wheeled human-powered transportation. And because many people did partake in cycling back then, they were passionate about it, an entire industry did spring up around it, and those were the shops that eventually built and serviced the safety bicycles that became much more popular and practical later on. Last year we did a video reviewing the Lefty. It's a mountain bike fork made by Cannondale that only has one leg, and it's upside down. And a lot of you guys were surprised to find out how strong it is. It doesn't look like it would be strong, it looks like it would crack in half. And when I said that, a lot of commenters were like, well, Seth, if it's so strong, why don't you ride it on Berm Peak? Take it off some big drops, take it off some jumps. And the reason I didn't do that was not the fork, it was the bike. All I had was a cross-country bike that wasn't my size. I ride all sorts of crazy bikes, but totally uninterested in taking a cross-country bike off of any of this stuff. That's a good way to go over the handlebars. That's a good way to get hurt in a lot of different ways. Cross-country bikes are designed for the opposite of that, but good sentiment, I like the idea, and so today, I've got a Lefty, and I'm gonna put it on my trail bike. Only like 5 problems with that. So first of all, what do I mean by trail bike? Well, a trail bike has a whole different geometry than a cross-country bike. It's made for pointing downhill, it's made to go fast, it's made to hit jumps. And this particular trail bike is spec'd with a 140 millimeter suspension fork. And the Lefty Ocho is only available in 120 millimeters. That's the maximum it can go. And so we would be bringing the fork down by 20 millimeters, which would alter the geometry of the bike. But I've got an idea. So when I'm talking about the travel of the fork, I'm talking about this measurement right over here, which is 140 millimeters. When I'm talking about the head tube angle, that's this right here, the angle of the fork. See, it goes into your head tube. Now, if we bring the front end of the bike down by 20 millimeters, it is going to steepen the angle by 1 whole degree, approximately. But this bike has 27.5-inch wheels. We're gonna put a Lefty on it with a 29-inch wheel. And that's gonna bring the height of this axle up by approximately 20 millimeters. And so, it cancels it out. And so I have here a 29-inch carbon wheel with bird spokes and a Lefty hub. And so this will fit on my bike, it'll match my bike, and then my bike's gonna have 2 different sized wheels. But let's put these parts on. No large drops, drop-offs, wooden structures, or dirt embankments requiring long suspension travel or heavy-duty components and hard landings. Example, hardcore mountain, free riding, downhill, north shore, dirt jumping, hucking. But I asked the engineers if it could handle it, and they said it'd be no problem. Well, that there's the... Well, it's the nicest star nut ever. So wrong, but so right. They even give you this tube to keep the brake hose straight in case you have OCD, which I do. Hell yeah. Oh, ho, 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 ho. Oh, oh my God, this is beautiful. I think I'm gonna have an emergency here. We gotta get this thing outside and stare at it. So it's positively insane looking, but what possible advantages could we get from this setup? Well, first of all, mixed wheel bikes are kind of cool, and this is usually the way they're set up. 29 in the front, 27.5 in the rear. Some people say it gives them the monster trucking ability of a 29er and the steering ability of a 27.5, or at least a mixture of the two. Also, we got a Lefty on here, which is super smooth, and it's 120 millimeters of travel. Now, what I use this bike for normally is riding weird stuff on Berm Peak, riding tight, technical jump features. Having less travel could actually be an advantage because it's going to give us a little more support. The bike's going to do what I say more quickly. And so let me see if that's the case. So feels really smooth, feels good, but more or less it feels just like it did before. The geometry hasn't changed, but that's actually not true. There are some things that are gonna feel different, but just riding down a trail, I'm totally used to this bike, and I think we can start hitting all the features on Berm Peak with a Lefty. Can't think of a better feature to start with than Snake Pit. It's a skinny line with a big blind hump and then a lip and a gap over a tree. It's kind of sketchy, but not that bad. It's a small jump, and so let's do it. No surprises, that felt pretty much like my old bike. The only difference is a bigger front wheel going off a little lip. The lip starts to feel more like a bump than a lip. The bike is smoother, it tracks better, but why wouldn't you be able to do that on a Lefty, right? There wasn't that much impact. Let's go to the drama drop. It's just a huge drop with the worst landing ever. That's exactly what we set out to build. It's for testing stuff, and we're gonna test this Lefty. All 120 millimeters of it. $120mm hardtails are just the wrong tool for that job, and so no surprises. First time felt really bad because I went nose heavy. Second time I pulled back, but handled it like a champ. Let's go hit some like normal-ish jumps with this thing. It feels a little different than my old bike for jumping. I would rather jump with a 27.5 wheel in the front because I'm used to it, but the 120 millimeters of travel is awesome. Bike responds really quick. There's a reason why dirt jumpers have short travel. Now we're gonna move on to the gnarly stuff, and before we do that, I think we should reflect on how weird this bike is. So this is a very weird bike indeed, and I can count like a million things. First of all, the spokes are shoelaces. Bird spokes are these polyethylene fabric spokes, and they're amazing. They give the bike a really good ride quality. The bike is mixed wheel. That's not that weird. Even manufacturers are releasing bikes with mixed wheels. It's got a Lefty. That's kind of weird, but anybody can buy a Lefty. Still, you don't see a lot of Lefties on trail bikes. This trail bike is filled with expansion foam as well. That's really weird. The Drivetrain is a Chinese SRAM Axis clone that mysteriously disappeared as soon as we posted a video about it. It has rev grips. It has an oblong chain ring, and up until recently, this bike had a chain entirely composed of Eagle master links. Oh, and it's got a really weird tire combination, but that's just what I had in stock. This is indeed a very strange bike, but I'm procrastinating because what I have to do next is pretty scary. Why would I have any anxiety about hitting the whale tail? I just rode it like 40 times 2 days ago, and the reason is there's something different with my bike now. It throws you off a little bit, but so far this has been pretty predictable, and so let's hit the splash pad and then clear the whole thing. Not much to report. I rode the entire mini slope line all the way to the pucker pad. Now I gotta do the old one, which means jumping over the splash pad onto the landing. Yeah, shouldn't be much different than my old bike, so let's give her a go. Feels real good. I am bottoming this shock out, Not a surprise. I think I'm gonna add a little bit of air pressure just because of the nature of what I do, but this is working out pretty well. Everything's been predictable. All right, on to the wall ride. So not much to report here. Little gnarly chunky section over here, and then I gotta hit this wall ride and jump off the end and try and catch that transition. I don't know, let's see how it goes. I think I just haven't hit this in a few months. That could have gone better, so let's head up and try it again. So that didn't go too bad, but I gotta move on to the thing that I've been dreading all morning. So when you ride this thing slow, it's like a normal teeter-totter. But if you hit it with enough speed, you can launch off of it and catch this transition over here. And that's why there's moss growing in front of it, because I only ride this when I have something to prove. And so mainly what I'm worried about here is that I only ride this when I'm on my A game, and right now there's something a little different about my bike. It's all in my head. It's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. Every time I make it over that thing successfully, it's just pure joy. That might have been one of the best times I've ever done it, because the run-up's a little chattery, and this handles chatter amazing. That's exactly what the Lefty's designed for, and 29-inch wheels aren't bad for it either, and so we hit everything on Berm Peak. No mishaps. Let's go back to the shop and debrief. So it says in the manual, no hucking, but despite that, this fork is Huckleberry Finn. It's Aldous Huxley. It's Teddy Huxpin. And this whole build that we put together here, it performed amazing. I don't even have any dirt on me, let alone injuries. This has been a pretty good morning. So a mixed wheel, Lefty hardtail trail bike. Name another one like that. I think it's beautiful. Definitely a head turner. Rides awesome. What more can I say? This is the raised reverse stem by Be More Bikes, and I don't really have to say much about it because we're all thinking the same thing. That looks unstable. I mean, it's supposed to be like that, right? Like it's supposed to be... And you would be right to be skeptical. This is a $400 stem that sits directly above your steer tube, and the creator claims that it just improves your bike in every single way, and for me, that doesn't pass the smell test. Now, if your understanding of bike geometry is like mine, then we're thinking, that looks like you would die if you descended on it, and it looks like you would die if you cornered on it, and it looks like you would die if you climbed on it. And if you just basically sat on your bike and took one crank, you would just die. And so I just took this for a ride, and did I die? I'm still alive. Actually, not only did I not die, but the trail died because I murdered it. Yes, it's actually frustrating how well this descends, and it didn't even take a lot of getting used to. I was pretty much confident on it immediately, and April 1st was a few days ago as of filming this, and this is not a joke. It's actually good for descending. Now, I was surprised, but not that surprised, because the day before I spoke to the creator of this stem. It's a guy by the name of Bronson. He's in his 20s and he actually races mountain bikes. Last week he raced downhill in the expert category with this stem on his bike, and he won it by 7 seconds. And that's not an isolated incident. He wins races, he posts insane times. He's a really, really capable rider, and he's not delusional, he's not cocky. He's a very measured, intelligent person, and he had a lot of good reasons for why he built this stem. He developed this after 2 years of messing around with different heights, different designs, trying them on different bicycles, different head tube angles, different styles. And even today, he doesn't really have a viable business model to sell this. It looks ridiculous. It's $400. No one's gonna buy it, and he's not stupid. He knows that. He built this for himself because he needed to build it to win races. How is that possible? You all know, whether you know about bike geometry or not, you all know this is unstable. Just look at it. Let me break down why you think it's unstable, even if you can't articulate it. So this is a bicycle with a normal stem, and the handlebars sit in front of the steer tube, and that kind of seems to make sense, right? Your arms are out on the handlebars, and this is sort of a stabilizing force. It's leading the bike. But if you really look at the bicycle, is that the case? Right, the handlebars are right here, and the front wheel is over there. So why is it that the bicycle feels stable? So I'm going to explain this with a caster, like you would see on the front of a shopping cart. And you know, when you push the shopping cart, the caster always goes so that the steering axis is leading and the caster is behind it, right? If you try to push it like this, it automatically flips around. That's just what it does. And so if your steering axis is behind your wheel, it would be unstable, right? Well, no, on a bicycle, your steering axis is not straight up and down like this, it's tilted back. And when it's tilted back, not only does the wheel stay stable, but it doesn't even want to turn, it is self-stabilizing. So let's look at steering a different way. Instead of just measuring straight to the ground, let's look at the steering axis. So your steering axis goes at the same angle as your head tube, and you can see where your steering axis intersects the ground is in front of the tire's contact patch. Contact patch is back here. The steering axis intersects the ground in front of it. So even though your bars are behind your wheel, they're actually leading the wheel on the steering axis. This is called the trail measurement because your front wheel, where it makes contact with the ground, it's actually trailing the steering axis. And if it's trailing the steering axis, if it's behind it, you have positive trail. There are very few bikes, if any, that I can think of that have negative trail. That would be really unstable. Now we go over to this bike with this stem on it, and well, the trail measurement hasn't changed at all. You still have positive trail. If you look here, the steering axis intersects the ground right here, and the tire makes contact with the ground back here. And so the bike still has positive trail. Putting a big, tall, weird stem on it doesn't really make a difference whatsoever. And you might say, well, no, that's not why we think it's unstable. Obviously, if nobody's on the bike, it's not going to be affected, but you're on the bike holding onto the handlebars. Your handlebars are usually out here. Now your hands are actually behind the steering axis, right? Actually, they're not. So what Bronson told me to do is measure the steering axis from where your hands are. So if we measure it right here and see where it intersects the ground, it's still in front of the contact patch. So even with this big, tall stem that's mounted directly on top of the steer tube, your hands are still leading the turn. So if you stuck with me through that whole steering geometry discussion, you're probably thinking, great, now I know why this isn't as unstable as I had originally thought. But so far you've heard no reasons why it should be any better for descending or doing anything for that matter. And so we'll talk about that now. So first of all, bike companies have been extending reach for a long time. We have to reach further for our handlebars than ever before. That's why I had a custom bike built with the reach measurement that I wanted. On a modern enduro bike, your arms are kind of extended way out and your elbows are locked. With the raised reverse stem, you're forced to have your arms kind of bent up like this. And now, not only can you take up a bump, but you can actually push the bike out if the trail dips down. But it's not just the descent where you get a benefit, it actually feels really good when you're cornering.
Wow.
When Bronson told me that, I thought, that's a stretch. I'm gonna have to see that for myself. But it turns out he seems to be right, at least in my test of this stem. And his reasoning for this is he says it loads your side knobs better. So those little knobs that stick out of the side of your tire, he says it allows you to put your weight down on those knobs more evenly. But another thing he said is that positioning the handlebars here brings your steering axis closer to the apex of the turn. Now that's true, but why would that give you better cornering ability? I don't know, but it feels really good. And so if this actually results in gains, if this actually makes bikes better, why hasn't any engineer in the bike industry figured that out yet? Why did this one guy figure it out, put it on his bike, and start winning races? And the answer is not so straightforward. So first of all, if you traveled back in time to 2003 and you showed yourself a modern bike, it would look very, very different, but the engineers back in 2003 were quite good. They were working on these problems very hard. Yet we have totally different bikes today, and what Bronson is saying is you can't change a bike very quickly if you want to sell it, because people are just skeptical of it. They look at it and they say, okay, that's insane. Why hasn't anybody done this yet if it's actually gonna work? And so bike companies are used to doing very incremental changes so that they ensure they can sell bikes. But over the course of bicycle evolution, we've seen some very big changes, and when it can be proven that they provide a benefit, people will eventually sign on to them. And even some of the changes that we have signed on to have drawbacks. There's nothing that you can do to a bike that doesn't have a benefit and a downside, right? We can make head tube angles 45 degrees, and when you're traveling down the face of a skyscraper, it would ride really, really well, but it would be terrible in every single other situation. And what I found is that the raised reverse stem is just pretty bad for climbing.
Yeah, I can't really keep the front end down. Yeah, I'm useless climbing on this thing.
And maybe not everybody who tests this is going to agree with me on that, but I had a lot of trouble staying stable when I was climbing. Now, Bronson told me that he climbs just fine with it. He doesn't see a downside whatsoever, and he said that any trouble that I'm having could be attributed to body position. This is such a radical change that in order to see the full benefits of it, you have to eventually change your body position, and if that sounds ridiculous, consider that we've had to change our body positions on bicycles incrementally over the course of the evolution of the mountain bike. Just think of how you would have stood on a bike in 1992 and think about your body position right now. It's a little bit different. Bronson says that
if I kind of lean forwards and perch up on the nose of my saddle, it's not as bad, but yeah, on tech, I have a lot of trouble.
You tell me I'm gonna buy a $400 stem that sticks out like a sore thumb, keeps my bars centered over my steer tube and my arms bent, and then I have to change my body position, and then I'm gonna see a benefit. It's pretty hard to get people to sign on to something like that. Now, to be clear, when this thing's sitting out on the bench, it is an absolutely beautiful piece of aluminum. But we're used to looking at our bikes a certain way. We're used to what bikes look like in 2023, and when this thing is on your bike looks different. But how am I gonna feel when I take this thing off my bike and hit another descent?
I expected jumping to be way sketchy, and it's not. It actually feels really good cornering. Wow. Oh. Getting new feels.
It really does seem to provide benefits when you're descending, and I hope it's in my imagination. Like, I really, really hope it's in my imagination. I don't want to have this stem. And it gets worse. I sent a message to one of my friends that I know is in possession of the stem right now, and I said,
hey, I'm really afraid I might like this thing. I'm really afraid that it has some benefits. And he texted me back a screenshot of a Strava personal record that he got on a bike he had never ridden before, using the stem. And so the raised reverse stem has sort of broken my brain a little bit. It's broken my brain in multiple ways. I mean, how does it feel good? What am I gonna do now that I'm sort of used to this bike like this when I put my normal stem back on it? And what is gonna come of this? I mean, this really has to prompt an in-depth discussion about geometry. We gotta talk about this. Maybe what we need is something sort of in between this and a normal stem. Or maybe we could do something even sketchier, a dropper stem. When you're climbing, it goes forwards like a normal stem, and then you press a little button and it comes up like that. That would be super sketchy. This is my 2008 Surly Big Dummy long-tail cargo bike. And it can do anything except for go fast or be high performance. But it's a Surly, and Surly owners will tell you that's not what these bikes are made for.
You can do anything with this bike, pretty much, besides, you know, downhill.
No Surly is the same. There's something different with each one, whether it be a rack or a bag or something outrageous.
You can bolt whatever you want to it. You don't have to care about the paint.
The more beat up they are, the better.
They ring the bell and do my turn signals for me.
I use it for camping, new trail exploration.
Today I have it set up for just kind of like a day at the river.
Trail building, dog packing.
She's seen the grocery store many times.
Sawzall blades.
Tiny Tabasco.
The chainsaw.
That's 3 different forks put together into one.
5 gallons of diesel. Pre-mixed fuel in this can.
I always put the most weight on the right side, so I always lean a little left.
It's probably 130 pounds with the dog on it.
No one takes a Surly serious.
And no one takes them too seriously.
I call it my apocalyptic bike.
When the apocalypse happens, there's going to be Surleys and cockroaches left.
Surleys are about being customizable. They have tons of tire clearance. Their steer tubes are like 40 feet long, so you can adjust the stack any way you like. There are rack mounts everywhere, water bottle mounts. And I appreciate all the customizations the previous owner of this bike made. These handlebars were installed by him. This custom surfboard here on the back. And he fashioned a little receiver over here for towing bicycles. This was owned by a bike shop, and they used it for running errands and delivering bicycles to customers. So this bike has some history and a really cool backstory, but today I'm gonna make it mine. Let's start with this kickstand. This is now the only bike I own with a kickstand, and it is most certainly the only bike I have ever upgraded the kickstand on. You need one of these if you're carrying kids around.
So when we're ready to go, push forward, and then you're good. Now if you want to stop, you pull your lever, and then you push back.
From the handlebars.
From the handlebars, and they can stand up, they can jump around, and it's not going anywhere.
Now Taylor's kickstand is tricked out. She can deploy it with a lever. Mine is manual, but it's heavy duty, it's stable, and it has a wide platform, and that's good because I too will be carrying kids. That's what we're gonna customize this bike for. The rear wheel has a loose hub. I don't know why. The speed wobbles. Could have been something I did to it. Otherwise, I'm pretty happy with the drivetrain. This 42 tooth cassette is fine, the SLX derailleur, but the cranks are huge, 175 millimeter. That's as big as it gets for normal sized people. And so we're going to put shorter crank arms on there. So next up, we're gonna replace this chain, but that's not as straightforward as you might think because this chain is really, really, really long. So we're gonna use 2 chains. We might even name the bike that. So it's not quite 2 chains. I had to remove a little bit. It's 1.5 chains. actually really like these tires. They roll really nice on the road, they look good, but we're not gonna strictly stick to the road. And these 2.4-inch Maxxis Holy Rollers have just enough tread and just enough volume to be a little bit dangerous. And that's what we're looking for. Now, because safety is gonna be really important, I'm installing these arc light pedals. You leave the bike sitting there for long enough, the lights turn off. You step on it again, they turn back on. And forwards is always white, rearwards is always red. Pretty good safety feature for a bike that's gonna be on the greenway, crossing roads with little kids. Before we go adding more weight to this bike, the stack is a little bit out of control. This really bothered me when I first took possession of the bike, but it doesn't anymore. I rode it and it just feels really comfortable up there, but I'm gonna shorten up this stem just to bring the handlebars a little bit closer to me. Normally, I would do that for handling characteristics on the trail. There's nothing that's gonna make this bike handle well, and so this is just for fitment. This is just to bring the cockpit a little bit closer to me because my arms aren't very long. This is gonna be way more comfortable for me, and that's what it's all about. The KS Exaform dropper post, I gave this a very critical review. Didn't matter whether it was on or off the bike, the thing just moved super slow. This one operates at a pretty normal speed. This is great for a commuter bike. If I pull up to a stoplight or I want to dismount the bike, I can drop the saddle and it makes it easier to get on and off. But yes, we lost the handlebars that were once on it. We aren't going to need those, and you're going to see why. This is the kid corral, and don't worry, it's not being held on with self-tapping screws. It feels super strong. The whole thing is bolted together as a unit. This is a way for you to just throw kids on the back and they can just hold on. The kid could technically jump off while the bike is in motion. They're not strapped in, and so you're gonna have to have that conversation with your kid. Don't jump off. I wonder if I could... Okay, this is pretty close to the configuration I want. I want these tires, I want this drivetrain, I want this kickstand, and I want the kid corral installed on the back. And before I go putting a saddlebag back on this side, I want to experiment with it and see if we can use it for something else. Is it really gonna be this easy? I just clamp it on here and it's perfect. When I go out on the greenway with my daughter, she will ride for miles, and then all of a sudden she'll just put her balance bike on the ground and stretch her arms up and say, "Daddy, pick me up." I have to set this thing up to carry some pretty unusual things. That's why I got a Surly. But at some point, I'm gonna have to carry two bikes, or one bike and one balance bike. I do have the trailer hitch. I could tow one bike, but the problem is, it has to have a quick release, and I honestly don't wanna be taking wheels on and off. And so I got a better idea. Even with my crappy fabrication skills, I was able to shrink this bike rack down and make a perfect little kid's rack. How do I not just attach this to the top of the kid corral? It would look so cool. This is a full-fledged bike rack, like a legit one. I still have the space on the right side to use the alt angle to carry another bike. So that's more or less the setup. Let's do some finishing touches. First, you know we're gonna need some miles-wide sticky fingers. Definitely this mouse mount to mount my phone. Gotta have a bell, and a passenger bell. And we have to install that subscriber-submitted Nalgene bottle cage. This is literally the perfect application for it. I'm installing this frame bag for stuff that always stays with the bike, like a multi-tool and an inner tube. And for anything else we need, there's the saddlebag. So that's it. We're gonna take this out on the greenway and see if it really is the ultimate dad bike. But first, let's stare at it.
So we loaded up, I stuck her on the back and she said, I don't want to sit there, I want to ride my bike. And so we rode out here to the skate park, and when she's sick of this, we can just go someplace else. Ride that bike? You want me to ride that bike on this?
Yeah.
I'm gonna smash the chain ring if I do that. Oh, it's fine. On flat greenway, once you get pedaling, it's pretty effortless. I mean, it's got the street tires. It's a bicycle, it rolls, right? Now on hills, you gotta gear down and kind of grind it out. I'm never gonna be riding this bike when I'm in a rush, and so I don't mind doing that. And that raises an important question. What kind of an idiot would buy a non-motorized long-tail cargo bike? You wouldn't be the only one asking that question. They're actually discontinuing the Surly Big Dummy this year. The Big Easy, its motorized cousin, is selling just fine, but I wanted a human-powered one because it's simple and it's cool. If you follow the channel, you know I embrace wireless shifting and every technology there is, but I still love stuff like this for what it does and the fun you can have on it. It's gonna change. I'm gonna constantly customize this and tweak this to my liking. In another year, my 2-month-old son will be old enough to go on here, but with a baby seat, and so I'm gonna have to hack this a little bit to fit this limo seat on the back. And yes, right now I find a big heavy cargo bike to be a lot more fun than I once would have, given the things that have changed in my personal life. Now, if you're looking for a human-powered cargo bike, you have fewer options than you ever would have. And while that is kind of sad, it just makes this even more unique. This is a 1997 Trek Y22. It is a carbon fiber full suspension mountain bike from an era where, as you can see, they looked absolutely insane. Today I'm gonna take it for a ride and I'm gonna tell you all about it. Now this particular model, the Y22, is made of carbon fiber, at least the main triangle is, and back in 1997, this would have been $2,200. If you adjust for inflation, that puts it at close to $4,000 in today's money. Some people today consider that almost entry level or mid-end, which is insane, but back then this would have been kind of in the middle. There were some models above it and some models below it. Now I feel a little strange calling this a carbon front triangle because it's not a triangle at all. In fact, it's a Y. That's where the Y series gets its name. Carbon back in the 90s was kind of sketchy sometimes, but not the Y series. Most of these that broke were left on the roof rack and driven into the garage. This was regarded as a pretty strong bike. Now the reason the shape of this bike frame looks so insane is that back then every bike company was trying to come up with their own version of what a full suspension bike should be, and this one was so popular that actually a lot of people copied it. Nowadays, full suspension bikes look more like hardtails than they did then. There's a triangle in the front and a triangle in the rear, and it seems like we've kind of come full circle in that regard. Full suspension bikes looked completely different than hardtails in the 1990s. Instead of using triangles, engineers just went through the alphabet and started throwing around letters. But in all fairness, they were working with a completely different set of parameters. Suspension options were kind of limited. 26-inch was the only wheel size. And as you can see, stems were all 95 feet long. These bikes are kind of a product of their environments. Back then, mountain bikers did not mess with their seat posts as much as they do now. There's not even a quick release here. And you can see the limitation here imposed by the rear triangle. This is where the seat post would crash into if you put it too low. And speaking of the rear triangle, this part of the bike is not carbon fiber, it's aluminum alloy. And actually one of the selling points of the bike was that it featured a low maintenance bushing in the linkage. Instead of bearings, it was a bushing. Today we use skateboard bearings in bikes, but back then bearings actually caused problems in linkage. The bushing was a selling point. And with all these different materials and bushings and what appears to be a strange design, the bike is held up pretty well. This one is extremely well preserved. You can see it has basically all of the original parts it would have had in 1997, including the period correct boots on the front suspension. Speaking of the suspension, and also kind of hilarious by today's standards, the fork has 80 millimeters of travel and the rear has 100 millimeters of travel. That's not much travel at all, and if anything today, there would be less travel in the rear and more travel in the front. And if you think the suspension is strange, the geometry is even stranger, kind of normal for the time, but a far cry from today's bikes. Everything from the bottom bracket to the C-tube is way up high, the bike is super short, and then it's got this super long stem. And as if your weight was not positioned far enough over the front wheel, these Bontrager Race bar ends came standard on the bike. A modern gravel bike is more enduro than this. Now, despite all those things I just said, the bike actually climbs really well. I didn't have one pedal strike today, and it was able to navigate pretty technical terrain. Surprisingly, single pivot bikes are not known for their efficient climbing platform. I don't know if it's efficient, but I can tell you it's capable. Another reason this bike climbs so well, it is just over 26 pounds. That's really, really light. Today, that's what a $7,000 or $8,000 cross-country bike might weigh. This was a $2,200 full suspension whatever. They didn't really separate it into categories back then, but there's a reason for that. Bikes in every single dimension were just smaller in the mid-90s. The wheels were 26 inches, the tires didn't have nearly as much meat on them, the frame was just smaller, and there was just less bike in every way. So then, how does it ride? Well, actually, rides pretty good. As I mentioned, it climbs pretty well for what it is. It does bob around a little bit when you're pedaling, like you might expect on a primitive-ish single pivot bike. But the suspension is surprisingly smooth. These are little skinny tires with inner tubes pumped way up. It's really not that bad. Now, when it comes to descending, you just really can't compare it to a modern mountain bike. Even the cheapest modern mountain bikes just have better geometry and bigger tires, and they're just better for descending. But measured against other bikes from the time, this would have been pretty impressive, and if you would have showed up to the trailhead with one of these, it would have turned some heads. Despite the somewhat primitive linkage, this was a unified rear triangle, so your crankset attaches to the same part of the bike that your rear wheel attaches, so there's no chain growth or kickback. So in other words, if you're going off of a drop or pedaling, it's not like cycling the suspension actually puts tension on the chain. All of this is kind of unaffected by the movement of the bike. But there wasn't much of anything isolating your actual body movement from the suspension linkage, and so when you're just pedaling down the trail, you do feel it bobbing up and down, and it's just kind of a characteristic of bikes from this time period. Another interesting factoid, this was the first year this bike was available with V-brakes. You can still see the mount for the cantilever brakes on the back here. With cantilever brakes fitted to this bike, there would have been a lot going on back here, and it would have been kind of a mess. And so these V-brakes were certainly a big upgrade. Talking about components, how about this carbon SRAM derailleur? Wow. There's of course no clutch on this, but there was grip shift up front, which was all the rage at the time. While we're up here at the cockpit, look how narrow it is. I did mention this super long stem, but if these brake levers were any closer together, they would be overlapping. This was just how bikes were made at the time, and actually, I find myself holding onto these bar ends more often just because they're way at the end and it gives me more stability. Now, I mentioned the suspension fork is 80 millimeters. This is a RockShox Judy, and at the time, elastomer suspension forks were pretty popular. The fork actually has these rubber cylinders inside of it that compress, and that's what gives you your shock absorption. To preload it, you just turn these knobs, and it just adds a little bit of pressure onto the elastomer, and that's how the fork works. Much less common back in the 1990s, the rear shock. This is actually a Fox air shock. You pump it up with air just like you would today, except there's no adjustable rebound damping, and there's not much room for anything inside of it with this 38mm shaft. These were different times, but it was still Fox and RockShox. Another thing you'll see all over this bike is OCLV. That was kind of Trek's claim to fame. It was the process by which they kind of sucked air out of the carbon mold. I'm not an expert on carbon manufacturing, but apparently at the time, this was pretty impressive. And actually, this carbon frame was manufactured in the USA, or at least it says so on the frame. In 2023, that is almost unheard of. Also kind of interesting, they decided to paint the carbon fiber. Back then, it was all the rage to just let the carbon fiber show. If you get the model above this bike, it's a raw carbon fiber frame. Now the Trek Y series was far from the only full suspension platform at the time, and it probably wasn't even the most influential one, but in one way this bike was very important in that it appealed to the masses. There were a whole bunch of different models. There was a cheaper model than this that was made of aluminum. There was a more expensive model. There was this one, which was, I think, the most popular. And it was successful enough to span 6 model years. So these sold pretty well, they became pretty common, and it is in every way a great example of a successful mountain bike from the 90s. And so the Trek Y series was one of the earliest mainstream full suspension mountain bike platforms that really stuck around for a long time. And it was strong, it was affordable, it appealed to the masses, it was available in different models. It kind of had all the characteristics that you would expect from a full suspension mountain bike today, but it looked very different. Now my last point is a subjective one. I think this bike is absolutely beautiful. You have to suspend what you consider beautiful in 2023, but this is, and they took a lot of things into consideration to make it beautiful. First of all the cables run down the left side of the frame. And so if you look at it from the drive side, it's super clean. I'm not gonna say understated, but clean. It's also worth noting that at the time, this would have been a massive departure from a normal triangular bike frame, and you know how cyclists react to new things that look different. And so if they would have made it ugly, that would have been really bad, but they didn't. They made it look beautiful, and it kind of caught on. Thank you, Tyler Hawes, for lending this bike for us to review. It's people like you who keep bikes like this in such good condition that allow us to glimpse back into the past and get a little piece of mountain bike history. This is amazingly well preserved all the way down to the original ESP grips, and so it's been a pleasure to ride this bike today, to examine it, and to share it with all of you. This bike rolled off the assembly line in May of 1994. I was 9 years old at the time, and although I don't remember the Cannondale F500 specifically, I do remember walking into a bike shop and seeing this, the Headshock. This Headshock was a proprietary suspension platform released by Cannondale in 1992, and as you can see, there's a rubber boot above the fork and below the head tube. This was not just an experimental product available for a few years. This was a mainstay on Cannondale mountain bikes for about a decade, and then on hybrid and commuter bikes for another 2 decades. As many of you know, this is not the only weird suspension fork made by Cannondale. There's also the Lefty, and we can actually trace the Lefty's roots back to the Headshock. But mountain biking did outgrow the Headshock for reasons that will become clear in this video, and that's a shame because it was and still is really good in certain ways, and today I'm going to tell you all about it.
Go ahead and try a 90s suspension fork. You'll notice that it's kind of sloppy, the small bump sensitivity is not that great, and the steering precision is abominable. The Headshock was Cannondale's answer to all of these issues, and it more or less addressed all of those concerns. Even by today's standards, a well-maintained Headshock is really, really smooth and has really, really good small bump sensitivity. When you sideload a traditional suspension fork from the 90s, you'll notice it kind of binds up and judders a little bit. It doesn't really perform that well under those conditions. The Headshock was more or less unaffected by this. Ride the Headshock on a gravel road or some single track with lots of tiny bumps. It is buttery smooth. It is truly remarkable, and we have its unique design to thank for that. Up on the top of the stem where the cap normally would be is this knob. That's a lockout that's really easy to access. Why you would need to lock out a 50mm suspension fork? Well, your guess is as good as mine, but it works really well. And yes, you heard right, 50mm of suspension travel. These Headshocks eventually went up to 80mm. If you're not a mountain biker, I'm talking about how much the suspension moves, how much travel it has. As a point of comparison, an average trail bike today would have 150mm of suspension travel. So here are some of the reasons why the Headshock is weird. First of all, just look at it. You don't see many suspension forks that look like that. These only fit on Cannondale bikes, and so it was somewhat limited, but that wasn't the only limitation. As you can see, this stem is slammed against the head tube. You couldn't put stack spacers underneath the stem of a Headshock. If you wanted to adjust your stack, you had to buy an entirely different stem. And you couldn't just use any old stem because the thing had a 1.54mm steerer tube. Of course it did. So yeah, there are threadless stems that fit the Headshock, and then there are threadless stems that fit everything else. But it is funny that as a consequence of the Headshock's internals, they had to put this big fat head tube on the bike, and eventually the entire industry would go to head tubes of about this diameter. Also weird, this sticker of this photoshopped guy with a big old head, this isn't something that the previous owner put on the fork, it came with it. This is Brad. If you were a kid in the 90s, you know that this looks like something you would see on a Pog. And actually, this comes from the movie Pulp Fiction. There's a line, "Look at the big brain on Brett." And somebody at Cannondale misheard it as Brad, and so this is Brad. I don't really get it. I mean, he's got a big head, and this is the Headshock, but I don't know. It was the 90s. And so, where did I get this Cannondale F500? Well, Facebook Marketplace, of course. It only cost me $100. Yes, somewhere along the line it was converted to single speed. Maybe someday I'll put some period correct parts on it and restore it. Modifications aside, the previous owner of this Headshock took really good care of it. It seems like it might have even been recently serviced. It works really smoothly, and it was a great example for this video. And so I'm gonna jump on this bike and go for a little ride and give you some off-the-cuff thoughts on this Headshock. All right, let's start with this locked so I can get a feel for this 90s F500 with no suspension. This is not a very rough trail, but oof, full rigid, you can definitely feel it. And it's always remarkable how bad the geometry was on just early 90s bikes. You can use a Walmart bike today with 29-inch wheels and just blow one of these out of the water. But it was still a very well-built bike. I'm gonna unlock the Headshock here, get up a little more speed. Oh, immediately it feels way more plush. And a trail like this is really appropriate at the end of the day for 50mm of suspension. Here we got some little roots here. It really feels good. The shock feels mostly linear, and that it sort of moves the same all the way through its travel. And then it ramps up kind of quick at the end, which is nice because it doesn't bottom out as bad as you might expect it to. Yeah, it's really remarkable. Even the damper isn't that bad. All right. Let's see. Yeah, probably gonna skip this on this. So I made an attempt at drawing what the Headshock's shaft looks like. It's basically a cylinder with 4 flat sections cut into it. Now those flat surfaces are there for 2 reasons. One, it keeps it from rotating, which is important because you're steering with this thing, but also it's a surface that needle bearings roll on. So instead of having 2 stanchions plunging into wiper seals and bushings, this is basically rolling up and down. It's said to be frictionless. That's a little bit misleading, but I think you get the picture. You can see there's a lot of friction there. Let's pretend this is not a stanchion, but rather a needle bearing. And this is the shaft of the Headshock. It's basically going like this. There is almost no resistance at all, and there's really nothing you have to do to get it started. It just starts moving, and that's the way the Headshock feels when you step on the bike. It just immediately is really plush and sensitive. And so when you're going over really small bumps, a normal shock, especially from the 90s, had to overcome this stiction before it got moving, whereas the Headshock was just kind of rolling along these bearings. And so especially at the time, it was the smoothest thing out there. Suspension forks from the 90s all had these rubber boots on them, but when you pull back one on a traditional suspension fork, you're just exposing the stanchion to some dirt. On a Headshock, if you pull this boot back, it's like pulling back Terminator's skin. All the internals are just exposed, and so it was really, really important to keep this in good working order and keep it secured well. These zip ties were actually from the factory, and if you serviced it and had to move the boot around, you would then put another zip tie on it to make sure that no dirt would get inside. Back then, if you were lax on maintenance, you would quickly find that your bearings in races would start corroding and your damper would get all gummed up in pretty short order. Now, another common issue was bearing migration. So we take my little example here with the pipe and the piece of wood. You can see here that on each revolution, this pipe just kind of ends up in the same spot. But if we do this thousands and thousands and thousands of times, eventually it migrates, and somewhere along the middle of its travel, the bearing is in the wrong spot, and so you would have to reset it. And that would involve taking this entire fork off the bike, disassembling it, pulling out the damper, and then topping out the fork and pushing the bearing back into the right place so that it would sync back up. And if you rode your bike really hard, this would have to be done fairly often. Most people back in the 90s would have taken their Headshock to a Cannondale service center to have it worked on. I bought this Headshock on eBay so I could attempt to take it apart. It's missing some parts here, but you can see this castle tool is one that you would have had to buy, but it was able to come apart with very little resistance. It doesn't like that. But now that I have all the parts out on the table, I could see that if you knew what you're doing, it wasn't that big of a deal, but it looks really, really intimidating. You can see here we have this round shaft with these flat spots cut into it, and these flat pieces of metal were the bearing races. Each set of these needle bearings is kind of a cartridge. It's just a sheet with these rollers on them, and that's what held all the needle bearings in place. Again, when these would migrate, you'd have to kind of hold them in place and top out the fork to reset their position. Now, as the travel went from 50 to 60 to 80 millimeters, Cannondale started to run out of space inside the head tube. What's more, all of these fit inside the same size head tube, and so whether the bike was a small, medium, or large, this was the same. And throughout the 90s, people started to get more serious about mountain biking, and they got pickier about bike geometry. Downhill was becoming a thing, and the Headshock was really starting to limit Cannondale, yet they still had basically the smoothest suspension out there. And so around 1997, Cannondale's race team started experimenting with a prototype 2-legged fork made out of 2 150 millimeter Headshocks. Again, this was all prototype, only on their race team. Now, this thing was so overbuilt that one of the race mechanics removed a leg from it and started riding it around the pit with just one leg. And everybody kind of stared at it and thought, The thing was pretty close as is to being stiff enough to be used with one leg. And so Cannondale thought, this might be the solution to our travel problem. We can use this same technology we already had, make a one-legged fork, and give it as much travel as we want. And thus, the Lefty was born. And as you saw in my other video, the Lefty still exists today. And even today, it's using much of the same technology as the Headshock. So with this replacement technology, Cannondale no longer needed the Headshock for their mountain bikes, but they still used it on their commuter bikes. In fact, on Cannondale's website right now, there's a picture of a bike with a Headshock. But now that we have the full story, it gives me a newfound respect for those engineers and what they did. This is some really outside of the box thinking here. It's easy to just write both of these products off as Cannondale being stubbornly different for its own sake. And even if there is a little grain of truth to that, at the time, suspension forks were kind of juddery and sloppy, and the Headshock did solve those issues. And in the case of the Lefty, they did solve the travel problem while also leveraging technology they had already invested heavily in. And yes, there are many reasons, as we discussed, that your bike probably does not have a Headshock or a Lefty on it, but that's why out-of-the-box thinking is so admirable. And in the case of the Headshock and the Lefty, it was part of an evolution of products at Cannondale. This is the Buffalo, and it is quite simply the most robust, serviceable, utilitarian, and cost-effective bike to ever exist. And it's fascinating. From the 13-gauge spokes to the 11-pound steel frame to the half-inch BMX chain to the luggage rack, which has a rated capacity of 220 pounds, to the fact that every fastener on the bike can be turned with a box wrench. So you're gonna wanna stick around because we're gonna learn today how a $165 bike can be so robust, useful, and life-changing. So why does the Buffalo exist? Who is this for? Well, if you're a field medic in, let's say, rural Colombia, the Buffalo could allow you to see 88% more patients than you could on foot. And if you're a farmer in Africa, the Buffalo could help increase your income by up to 23%. And if you're a student, it could help increase attendance by up to 28%. Now you might say, Seth, yes, those figures are not hard to believe, but any bicycle could do that. If you deliver bicycles to some place that doesn't have them, everybody's gonna be more productive. We know that. Why the Buffalo? Well, a bicycle doesn't help somebody if it'll only run for a couple of months and then it's dead in the water when it breaks. These communities don't have bike shops. They don't have parts. They don't have the kinds of tools that we use to work on our bicycles. And so World Bicycle Relief engineered a bike that was designed specifically to stay running in the most isolated communities on the planet. Right? If you live in rural Zambia and your tires wear out, you can't just order new ones on Amazon. And so when these bicycles are deployed, they include entire supply chains complete with training programs so the communities they're in can keep them running. We'll talk more about that later, but first, let's get into the nuts and bolts of the Buffalo. So yes, serviceability is one of the main strengths of the Buffalo, and so they made it so you can turn just about anything on it with a box wrench. I mean, technically, one adjustable wrench could allow you to fix just about anything on the bike, save for a few choice items. Even the bottom bracket can be turned with an adjustable wrench or box wrench. Check out this crankset. Even on a really cheap bike, this bolt over here is recessed, and so you can only get to it with a socket wrench or even a hex key. On this, it's out in the open, so you can just turn it with any old wrench. And then of course, everything from the wheels to the stem to the handlebars to the headset, they're held on with normal hexagonal bolts that you can turn with a wrench. And yes, it does have a threaded headset and quill stem. I always make fun of these because they're kind of relics from the Jurassic period, but there are a lot of very good reasons that this bike has one. First of all, a quill stem is height adjustable with just one bolt. There's no need for stack washers or pinch bolts or anything like that. And if anything happens to this headset, you're more likely to find replacement parts. In developing countries, threaded headsets are found on a lot of old bikes, and so you could probably cannibalize one, find one in a junkyard, or even get replacement parts at a bike shop in the city. Here's another tool you probably won't need to maintain your Buffalo: a chain wear indicator. This is a seriously heavy 1/2-inch BMX chain. I say BMX chain because that's the only type of bike I've seen these on. It is so heavy that, I don't know, this chain ring probably doesn't wear out. It wears in. I know that makes some of you cringe, but many of us spent our childhoods just running chains into the ground and the bike still goes. Just to give you a frame of reference for how heavy this chain is, let's take a look at it next to an Eagle chain, a 12-speed SRAM Eagle chain. You can see the size is like double. They use these on some mopeds. And very likely you're not going to be needing a torque wrench on this bike because everything save for the grips and saddle and a few choice items are made of steel and not like chromoly steel, not the high-end stuff. This is high tensile steel the whole way through. It's very forgiving, and so you can kind of over tighten stuff and just do it by feel, and the bike's gonna be fine, but that makes it pretty heavy. Actually, this bike is extremely heavy. It's 55 pounds. That's a lot like riding an XC bike while carrying an XC bike. It's literally double the weight of a cross-country bike. It's insane. And they could have made it lighter. They could have made it lighter for the same price, and it probably would have been just as strong, but there's a reason for the heavy steel. See, Buffalo takes a lot of input from their users. They get sent pictures of how people are using the bikes and what they've broken on the bikes, how they've been fixing them. And one thing that they found is a lot of people are welding things to the frames, like foot pegs for carrying passengers and rack extensions for carrying more items. And if you've ever used a stick welder, you know that really thin steel tubing is kind of tricky. You can fry it. So they wanted a heavy steel frame compatible with the types of welders and electrodes that you would normally find in developing countries. It's examples like that that lead me to believe that Buffalo might just be the most user-centric bike company in the whole world. As I mentioned, many people who ride these bikes are actually field testers, and when they send feedback back to Buffalo, they take it very seriously, and rarely does it have to do with performance, usually has to do with serviceability and longevity. This drivetrain also features steel crank arms, and that's not that common, but these can be bent back if they're damaged, or you can even weld to them. Let's have a look at these wheels. These are steel wheels with double-walled rims. That's for strength and stiffness. They're also not all that big, 26 inches, 650B. The smaller the wheel, generally the stiffer it is. It's also got really stiff spokes. 13 gauge. And these spoke nipples are not small. You could probably turn them with an adjustable wrench. When you have big spokes like that, there's less of a chance they're gonna get stripped out, and there's less of a chance they're gonna get damaged if something gets caught in the wheel. And as we already established, this bike is designed for carrying heavy loads, and so you want really strong wheels. And speaking from my own experience, wheels are kind of vulnerable. As a kid, I wrecked wheels all the time. The spokes would get loose, they'd get all wobbly. Just making the wheels as strong as possible is probably not a bad idea. Here we have a Schrader valve and an inner tube. Inner tubes you can just patch over and over again, and on the valve cap that comes with the Buffalo, it actually has a valve core wrench built into it, so you can service the valve and hopefully keep it running for a longer time. And then there are the tires. As you can imagine, these are very heavy and puncture resistant. They're made by Kenda for Buffalo. These are proprietary. Now, they're not made for shredding loam trails or anything like that. They're made for dirt roads and gravel roads. And so they just need to be wide. They just need to have a good amount of volume. And for a commuter bike, they kind of do. As I said, the rims are really wide. The tires are really wide. I have them pumped way up, but I bet you could air these down a little bit and get a much smoother ride over janky surfaces. Now down here at the hub, things get a little bit interesting. They actually use chromoly axles, and so it's a higher quality steel than the rest of the bike. Axles are one of those things you don't want to have to source or replace very often, and so they make axles that are really strong and will last a long time. Continuing down at the hub, we have here a servo brake. It's kind of like a drum brake designed for bicycles. You've probably never seen one of these if you're into road bikes and mountain bikes and gravel bikes. You would normally see this on a commuter bike. It is very, very reliable. It does not require a lot of service, and It's weather resistant. Everything is contained inside of it. And as you can see, there's a very thick cable driving it. I suspect you wouldn't have to replace that very often either. Now, as I mentioned, this bike has a coaster brake and it has a servo brake. Now, that's good for several reasons. First of all, there's redundancy. You have a brake on the front and the back in case one of them isn't working. Second, if you're carrying heavy loads, you have more braking power. And third, neither of these brakes touch the actual surface of the rim. They're both hub brakes. And that's really important because if these rims get a little bit out of whack and they're wobbly, the brakes are still going to work just fine. Ugh. Nah. The bike does have a number of accessories though. Yes, the Buffalo has a bell. That's pretty nice to have, but also nice, the fenders. People are using these for transportation every day in all weather. I was riding this in all sorts of places today and I didn't get anything on me. These fenders work really well. I'd say they're almost essential given what this bike is for. But also there's a two-legged kickstand. On my big dummy Kargo bike, I have a two-legged kickstand and it is essential when loading and unloading people and cargo. And so, of course, there's one on the Buffalo. It looks kind of flimsy, but it seems to work with the rated capacity of the rack just fine. It is made of steel. It is not going anywhere. Also, like any good kickstand of this kind, as soon as you set the bike in motion, the kickstand automatically goes down. So you're not messing with it and your cargo. You just get on the bike and ride away. Another interesting accessory, this pump. If you're gonna have one tool to work on your own bike, one tool, it's gonna have to be some kind of a floor pump. This is small, it appears to be inexpensive, but it's not bad. This bottom piece over here appears to be cast iron or something. There's a lot of interesting things going on in this pump that, to be honest, I don't understand, but I've used it and it's not bad. That there is just about exactly what this is rated to, so let's ride around with it. Oh, I should have chosen someplace flat to do this. It works. This is insanity. How am I gonna get this down to the driveway? They weren't kidding. They said it was rated for 220 pounds. Rated for 220 pounds. That means people are exceeding this regularly, and they said they do. These are some strong and resilient people. I can barely keep this thing stable, but it's not flexing. I carried 2 toddlers and their bikes on my Kargo bike, which is rated for about that, and it was kind of sketchy, honestly. This is, I'm astonished. And given that there are many photos and videos of the Buffalo carrying people and things without helmets, some warm milk drinking, soft sheltered individual has to always point out how dangerous that is and how they should have something guarding the spokes. Well, guess what? In a lot of parts of the world, helmets are actually luxury items. Oh, how am I gonna get this thing off? Wow. Now, one notable accessory that the Buffalo does not have is a place to put water bottles. Not only is there not a bottle cage, there aren't even bosses to screw a bottle cage into. They thought through everything on the Buffalo very, very hard. Everything is intentional. Why wouldn't it have a bottle cage? I'm not entirely sure, to be honest, but my guess is that bottle cages take a special water bottle. I'm pretty sure in developing countries, they're not kind of choosing exactly what type of water bottle they're gonna get. They're not going on Amazon and ordering a bike bottle cage specific water bottle. They can just strap whatever it is they need to the rack. Now, in this big, heavy steel bike, there are a few choice items that are not steel. As we mentioned, the tires, of course, and then also the grips. The grips are extremely UV stable. These are made to be out in the sun in some of the hottest climates all day. Also, the seat they put more thought into than you might think, because with it and the grips, you have your bike stand for working on it. Even people who work on Buffalo bikes professionally will often turn them upside down to do repairs. And so these take a lot of abuse from making contact with the ground. They made them really strong and they made them really UV stable for being out in the sun for long periods of time. Yes, there are trained mechanics for Buffalo bikes. For every 50 to 100 bikes distributed, they train one field mechanic to help take care of them, and they are trained from the spokes up. And in many of these places, it creates economic opportunity because now people are being more productive and they need their bikes running, and now there's somebody who knows how to fix and service them. They even have Buffalo branded bike shops that carry parts and accessories for Buffalo bikes. There are 50 such locations in Africa, which is good because there are not many bike shops outside of the cities. At these locations, there are of course trained mechanics. It's kind of like the Trek store. So I did ride the Buffalo quite a bit on some rough gravel roads, and I'll tell you, it's not a bad ride. Not only is it made of steel, and steel normally does ride fairly well, but it's made of a lot of steel, and so you don't really feel little vibrations, you just feel big bumps. See right over here, there is a fallen tree. And I'm gonna have to lift this 55-pound monster over it. But it does have a decent ride, it absolutely does. And on the dirt and gravel roads that it's designed for, where it is most at home, it really is good. This is an off-road bike. And I noticed something interesting. I was not easy on this bike today. I was loading it in and out of my truck. I was driving it in the water. I was hitting bumps. I think I even popped it off a couple of jumps that aren't on video. But the bike works just how it did when I took it out this morning. I don't have to adjust anything. On like a $160 department store bike, I would at least have to mess with the brakes or line up the wheel or something, or the handlebars would move. This thing is really solid because it's no frills. There's nothing extra on this bike. It's everything you need, nothing you don't. There's no suspension, there's no flames or anything like that. They just made the best, most practical bike they could for the money. So World Bicycle Relief is a non-profit started by one of the co-founders of SRAM actually. The likes of Trek, Giant, Specialized, Kenda, and many others lent their expertise and resources to make this mission possible. But WBR is completely separate from all of those organizations. Actually, they're all competitors. Now, if you ask me how to make anything better, my answer is always bikes. Like, how do we make this birthday cake better? Bikes. To me, bikes are just the answer to everything, and so I'm really glad there's somebody out there trying to bring these to communities that need them most. And that $165, that's delivered. This bike is $165 delivered to the far reaches of the globe. And so $1,650, the cost of an entry-level full suspension bike, can put 10 of these bikes in people's hands, create amazing economic opportunities for them, and improve their lives drastically. Most people watching this video love bikes because they make us healthier, happier, they're fun, and they bring us together. But for some communities, bikes transport school children, medics, medical supplies, clean drinking water, and they create amazing economic opportunities for the people living there. And that makes the Buffalo, I'm being honest when I say this, one of the most interesting bicycles I've ever reviewed. This is the Kargo bike, and it is a financial controller's worst nightmare. It took millions of dollars in research and development to bring this to market, including an automotive crash test and a custom mold for this enormous cargo box. It has a built-in headlight with high and low beams. It has adjustable headrest, a tail light, a built-in GPS tracker, and 4-piston hydraulic disc brakes fit for a downhill bike. Anything they could think to engineer, they did, and to their credit, some pretty admirable things like pedestrian safety, but did they consider whether this was a profitable business idea? I'm not so sure. So we're gonna spend the day riding the Kargo bike and testing all its features, and if you watch till the end, I'm gonna fill that cargo box with 600 pounds of granite and ride it down a huge hill to see if the brakes work. Wow, holy crap. But first, who is this even for? Well, it's a cargo bike for families trying to decide between a second car and a cargo bike. And so this bike is absolutely enormous. For reference, here's a Surly Big Dummy long-tail cargo bike. Look at how much longer the Kargo bike is. You can see another key difference between the Kargo bike and my beloved Big Dummy. The cargo box is up front. That's actually pretty common these days on cargo bikes, and it's up there for several reasons. First of all,
Vehicle on bicycle collisions are most common from the back, and so if your kids are riding with you, you want them up here in the front, but also without the drivetrain in the way, they can get the center of gravity way low. But as you can see, that means the front wheel is way out in front, and then the handlebars are over here. I mean, look at it. I'm back here holding onto the handlebars. The steer tube goes straight down and the wheel's up there steering. It feels kind of weird the first time you ride it, but you get used to it really quickly. Other cargo bikes accomplish this with belts and cables. Much like cars use steering linkage, when those belts and cables snap, there's usually a lawsuit that follows. But in the case of the Kargo bike, there are actually 4 cables for redundancy. Also up here at the front, you can see there's a suspension fork, which is kind of nice for your kids and your cargo. They're going to be riding in there. The front wheel is a pretty small diameter compared to most bicycles. That's because cargo bikes need to have a really low center of gravity. Figure a 120-pound mom with 2 kids, maybe their backpacks. She's got to wrangle this thing, get it started, get it up on the kickstand, and so having everything as low as possible is really important. And if she wants to stop this bike, it's gonna be pretty easy with these brakes. This is a 203mm rotor. It's like half the diameter of the wheel, and it's got Magura hydraulic disc brakes. The one in the rear on the bigger wheel has 4 pistons. That's like what you would find on a downhill bike. And again, I'm gonna fill this with granite and go down a hill later to test that. Also up here at the front is a very nice built-in headlight. It has high and low beams, and so it'll come as no surprise that the Kargo bike also has a taillight. Moving back, we get to this massive cargo box, and this is kind of where they spent all the money. This is made of EPP, that's expanded polypropylene foam, and one of its characteristics is that it's really good at absorbing impacts. They tested this with an automobile. Side impact and front impact must have cost a couple of $100,000 or something like that. And then the mold for this box, I think, was like $250,000. It's huge. And before I show you what's inside the box, notice that the outside of the box is completely rounded. There's nothing sharp on it. That is for pedestrian safety. How many people want to pay for that? My cargo bike doesn't even take rider safety into account. I've got to just hope that my 3-year-old doesn't jump off the back of it. And if you look at this box closely, it kind of resembles that foam they make disposable coolers out of, but this is nothing like that. It's very strong. In fact, there is a step here for kids to use to get in and out of the cargo box. The cargo box also features a very nice canopy. It has sides and everything, and I guess if you're actually using this as a car replacement, you need to drop off your kids at school in the rain, well, you're gonna get all wet, but your kids are gonna be nice and dry. But as I said, if they could engineer something, they did, and so they put fidlock buckles on the side so that the canopy can lift up for easier entry and exit. And now you can see the inside of the cargo compartment is absolutely massive. There's all this floor space over here, and the sides even go up nice and high to offer as much protection for your kids as possible. And you might be thinking, well, where do they sit? There are these covers here for the seats, which actually fold up, just like the seats in the back of a pickup truck. So with these covers removed, you can see there's a little latch that holds the seat cushion up. Then they come down to reveal 5-point harnesses. But not only that, headrests. Not a secret that headrests are actually a very important safety feature in a collision, and so these are adjustable to fit all different size kids. I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I can actually put these at different heights for both of them, and they've told me they're quite comfortable. I would have to say the same. Now, I'm not a very large person, but I am a full-grown adult, 150 pounds, and I can sit in here no problem with my arms and everything inside. It's actually more comfortable than a coach airline seat, which is pretty sad. I've slept on those overnight, and so, I don't know, maybe I could overnight camp in this thing. Not only that, but if I removed the seats from here, I would have maybe another 4 inches of space inside of here. Now, I can actually feel the suspension fork at work. The ride is really, really comfortable. I actually have ridden on other cargo bikes, and this is the most comfortable one so far. All right, let's see if my cameraman can successfully get this onto the kickstand.
Oh, I need to use this.
You need to use the handle for the win. Now with these fidlock buckles, it looks like they actually designed it so that kids can open it up and get out themselves. And as you can see,
This thing's completely stable. I can just climb in and out of it, and there's not much of a risk of the bike flipping over. And when mom wants to put this back up on the kickstand, they put a dedicated handle here. So you grab onto the handle, put your foot on the kickstand, and pull it back. Now, depending whether you're dropping your kids off at school or going for a grocery run, you can actually configure this cargo compartment several different ways. First of all, they give you this thing, and it actually slides in over here and works as a tray. I could see kids sitting here, maybe with the bike parked, eating some lunch. You can also strap things to the top of the tray, and there's a ton of space underneath it to store stuff. Also available is a big liner with handles that fits in here and makes it a big bag, sort of. You can bring it into the grocery store, maybe even put it in your shopping cart, and then when you're done, pull the entire bag out and bring it into your house. Now, while this handle up here helps you pull the bike onto the kickstand, to get going, like most cargo bikes, you just set it in motion. You can either stand over the frame and push it forwards and then start pedaling, or as I do, I just sit on it and then start pedaling it away, and it kind of goes. Now, like most modern cargo bikes, the Kargo bike has an electric assist, but not as common a mid-drive electric assist. And so the power's not in the rear hub, it's up here at the cranks. But if you look at the rear hub, it looks huge. It looks like there's a motor back there. There's not. There's an internal gear hub with automatic shifting. This is made by Enviolo, and it's got a belt drive, and so you don't have to lube the chain. There's not anything sticking to it. It's really low maintenance. You just kind of get on it and pedal, and if it stops working, you buy an entirely new bike. I'm just kidding. This is actually all very serviceable, and the mid-drive is really nice because it senses how much force you're applying to the cranks, and it responds proportionally. A lot of e-bikes, you can just kind of pretend to pedal, and when it senses you pedal, it just kind of kicks on. This is really proportional, and so as much power as you're putting into it, it adds to. It's more than enough to offset the massive weight of this bike along with whatever you're carrying, but they actually make you do a little bit of work, and in my opinion, that's a little bit safer and it's a little bit more fun. Now, between the electric assist and the low center of gravity and the internal gear hub, this thing is pretty easy to manage for its weight, but it's probably gonna be the heaviest thing out on the greenway. This is 121 pounds without any people or cargo in it. That's 55 kilograms, and that raises a really important issue: e-bike regulation. These bikes are just getting bigger and heavier and more powerful and more capable, yet you can just kind of smuggle them onto the greenway and legally ride them next to bicyclists and pedestrians and skateboarders, yet they're so much heavier. It's like when a semi is riding next to one of those smart cars. Now, this thing is super bougie. It's $10,000. They could have made it go 40 miles an hour if they wanted to, but they put a mid-drive on it and they limited it to 20 miles an hour. And as I mentioned earlier, they took pedestrian safety into account. Now, they spent a lot of money trying to make this thing as safe as possible. And while some of these safety features are for your kids, other safety features are to make it safer on the greenway and safer for those around you. Who really wants to pay for that stuff when it's for other people's safety? And so it looks to me like all that expensive R&D could have been a bet on the future of e-bike regulation. They not only tried to design this to be safe in the street alongside automobiles, but also alongside other bicycles. That's kind of an interesting thing for a new brand to spend money on. I mean, they could have spent less money to put a throttle on it and big spikes off the front. And that raises another question: who even is Kargo? What new brand would have the resources for a project like this? It's Ergon. Ergon's behind this. That would explain all the Ergon products on the bike, and it would explain why it is so German. Now, given the size and weight of the Kargo bike, they kind of expect you're gonna buy it in a store and then ride it home. And if anything goes wrong with it, you either have to fix it yourself or somehow get it rideable, because the kinds of urban families that are gonna be buying $10,000 cargo bikes don't always have utility trailers and pickup trucks. Speaking of which, I can get this into a pickup truck myself with some difficulty, and it still hangs out the back. This thing is very, very difficult to transport if you're not pedaling it.
So I've just removed both seats, and it's amazing how much space is actually in here now. Before, I was sitting against the folded seats, and now I've got all this space here, and actually, I'm kind of comfortable. If I just put a pillow on my back, I think I could sleep here. Like I said, I've slept on overnight flights. If I can do that, I could definitely overnight camp in my cargo bike, get on it, and ride home. I don't know if I want to actually do that, but if you would like to see me do that, let me know. So given how spacious this cargo box is, I did some calculations. I figure we could fit about 600 to 700 pounds, that's 270 kilograms of granite in it, in the form of pea gravel. This is so sketch. Wow. I think it can fit a little bit more. Oh my God, it's so heavy. All right, so my driveway is really, really steep and it's long. It goes down and then it turns and then it's like 35% grade. And I'm gonna ride it down. Now, I think the brakes are gonna be okay. Because it's all in front of me, I can always pull the ripcord and jump off the back of the bike. And I have enough experience to do that with confidence. And so I would never try this if you've never ridden a bike before, if you've never bailed from a bike before. Thankfully, I have many times. And so I'm gonna ride this down to the bottom of the driveway, and then I don't know what I'm gonna do. I better bring a shovel with me. When I push this forwards, it might just tip over and I have no chance of going. Whatever happens, happens. Let's see if we have a prayer of holding this up when we push it forward. Oh, this is sketch, but I think we got it. Wow, it feels so heavy. Like the tire is actually up to some pretty high pressure. If these brakes just smoke and give out, we're actually gonna have to bail. Oh my God, there's so much driveway in front of me. This was dumb. This was dumb. These brakes are gonna be smoked by the time we get to the bottom. And if I let go of the brakes, we're gonna go like 50. The brakes are starting to not stop as well. Okay, we're in trouble, guys. We're in trouble. We are completely, oh my God. Wow, holy crap. Oh my God. The brakes are not happy. We just, I think, smoked the pads. Holy crap, how are we gonna get this thing up on its stand? Wow, that is some German engineering. Do I have any water left? Look, they're like freaking purple. Oh, that was now officially the sketchiest thing I've ever done. Yeah, if you have to descend about 150 feet on a 35% grade and you have 600 pounds of pea gravel, you can do it at least once on this. All right, I am thoroughly impressed with this bike. I can't believe I was able to kind of manage that, although just barely. These are only available in Europe right now. Eventually they'll make their way to the United States, and to be honest, I think it's too early for that. This is for when everybody's riding bikes, for when it just doesn't even make sense to ride a car anymore. This is a bike from the future, and we hear about products that were way ahead of their time that didn't work out because the future people weren't there to buy it. I sure hope I'm wrong about this one because it's a really cool bike with a lot of really cool features. We've seen this bike before. This is the swing bike, and it's very weird. It's got a pivot point in the middle that lets it just kind of bend and fold over. And before we get into why it has that and why you would want it to, I should note that it's kind of broken. I took it off a staircase a long time ago and the whole pivot point bent back. And so we're gonna first start by fixing the bike, and then we're gonna take it out and I'm gonna show you how it works. And we're gonna get some people who've never ridden it before to give it a try. So what makes this swing bike a swing bike is this kind of pivot point in the center that makes it swing. It allows you to do some pretty fun tricks, and it makes the bike just fun to ride overall. As you can see though, the whole pivot point here, we'll call it the pivot tube, is bent backwards. So assuming this is a piece that we can replace, we might be able to find a new pipe. And if we can't, then we could probably heat it up and bend it back. I just really hope none of the bearings or races are damaged. So from here, we'll just take it apart and see what's inside. I've never actually gone into this before. And now we have the back end here. Okay, so this is a pretty strong pipe that fits in here, and I'm gonna see if we can bend it. This is a lot of leverage, but it's not enough. Oh yeah, not even close. I mean, this bar is just bending. It's not really strong enough. Yeah, how do we do this?
I'm thinking double strap.
Double strap, and how's that gonna work?
So a strap would be holding the bike in place against something, and we use a ratchet strap to pull the other piece back straight.
What do we attach it to? Like the trailer hitch of my car or something? Okay, I hate this. So let's get set up and give it a try. I'm just gonna put some safety glasses on. Oh, the gator's just moving forwards. I gotta lock the brake better. It doesn't like this. It's just pulling the gator. Just stomp on the brake. Yeah, I don't like that. Let me let up and see if it's bent back. It looks pretty bent back to me. At this, we gotta just go like a hair further. I think that's it. That's as far as we're gonna get it before we break something. All right, I say we did that pretty safely and efficiently. Nothing could have gone wrong. All right, so we're gonna put this all back together, take a look at it, and then bring it out someplace where I can show you more about it. All right, she's back together. Me looking at it right now, I can sort of tell it's bent, but just barely. Everything you do with this is awkward. All right, so we're gonna go into Squatch here and see if anybody wants to try the swing bike. Yo, James, can I interest you in a broken collarbone?
I already have rheumatoid arthritis, and you want to give me a broken collarbone?
So I got a swing bike outside.
Oh, dear God.
You ready?
Are you?
Just trust it. Just trust it. You're going fast enough. Pedal. Right now, start pedaling. You got it. Just commit, James.
So swing bikes have a little bit of a learning curve. And so James is currently trying to figure out how to turn right.
All day.
I think you figured out how to ride it. Learning how to swing it is a whole different story.
Oh,
That
yeah,
just
yeah, yeah,
goes
yeah.
naturally.
I'm happy I made a turn. I'm glad I didn't just go straight into the gravel and die.
Let's see if Hodge wants to try it.
Yeah, if Hodge wants to try it. Have you ever tried one?
Never even heard of it.
Good luck.
I'll be honest, it looks like a hospital trip, but I'll give it a shot.
Just a bicycle.
Yeah, you say that.
Oh, he's got no problem.
Yeah.
James is pissed because he got right on the bike and started riding it. Once you realize that it's nothing to be scared of, it's really not that bad. But actually swinging it definitely takes some time.
Oh, it is. First try of success.
Hey, you survived your first trip on a swing bike, so that's good. Howdy. Just kick your hip out. Ooh, there it goes. Hey, it's not as difficult to ride as the half bike. So Pat's been riding for about 5 minutes and he's really starting to get a feel for it. I'm curious to see how tight you can go around one of the poles. Yeah, you got this. Yeah, that's how you start figuring it out. So the swing bike definitely has a learning curve. To be completely honest, I can't remember the first time I sort of got it. I think it was rather quickly, but I had like, let's say an hour to ride the swing bike. Like I got to actually take it on a ride. James and Hodges took it for I don't know, 5 minutes each, and they were able to just feel comfortable riding it around circles, but not necessarily swinging it. I'd say for most people, that's probably 45 minutes, hour on the bike. So how do you ride a swing bike? The first step to riding a swing bike is just figuring out how to get on it and pedal and not fall over. The trick to that is to push out so that the bike doesn't want to pivot, and then get a feel for it. Once you realize that there's nothing to be scared of and the bike isn't just going to fold over, then you'll start to feel comfortable on the swing bike. You'll start swinging a little bit. Start steering left to right, and then what you're just gonna find yourself doing is leaning over more and more and more. Just like a unicycle, it's hard to come up with tips and tricks about how to ride it. It's more about time in the saddle. I'd say once you've ridden a swing bike for about 10 minutes, you're gonna feel safe on it. You're not gonna feel like you're gonna fall over. And by the time you're about 45 minutes in, you're gonna be kind of swinging from left to right. If you wanna do those tight little circles or those tricks where you swing your legs over the top tube and pedal from the other side, I don't know, maybe a few hours, maybe a few days. It depends on how daring you are, how willing you are to fall over. Let's face it, you're not gonna be going 35 miles an hour on a swing bike unless you take it down a hill. Whoa! So I just figured something out. This is a terrible mountain bike. So the thing with the swing bike is it's not a good bike. It's not good for bike things. It's not good for getting around town. It's not good for going fast. It's probably not even that good for fitness. But what it is good for is having fun. And so you have to have a certain lifestyle and a certain situation to consider purchasing one of these and expect to get even close to any use out of it. Right now, this spends most of its life just sitting in my storage unit because we live in Asheville, and in Asheville, there's tons of hills, roads are harrowing. You don't want to be riding a swing bike everywhere. On a greenway like this, it's fun, but I'm not going to go and take the swing bike out every day because it attracts attention. Now, with all that being said, the swing bike isn't just a way to show off. It's actually very fun. When you really learn to ride it, you start to do it in such a way where you're not steering with the handlebars, you're just swinging your hips out and making the back of the bike turn. The front of the bike is just leaning over, and they know people ride them like that, and so that's why these are equipped with Kenda conniption tires. So there's tread all the way around the tire onto the sidewall because they know that sidewall is going to be just gripping into the ground when you have it leaned over. Now, I thought long and hard about what my weirdest bike is, and I'm pretty sure it's this swing bike. I have an off-road unicycle, and somewhere laying around, I have a giant BMX bike with 4-inch wide tires. But this is definitely my weirdest bike because it has a pivot point in the middle of the frame that makes it look like it would be impossible to ride. It's just completely ridiculous. This is a legitimately hard bike to ride. It turns heads everywhere. It is definitely our weirdest bike. I have here my old trail bike. Last time we built up a new one. That's gonna be what I ride from now on. And somebody in the comments said, why don't you turn the old one into a slope duro bike? Now, I wouldn't be the first one to do that. A lot of YouTubers are making slope duro bikes, but I think I can do a better job of explaining the process and what exactly a slope duro bike is. Simply put, a slope duro bike is a trail bike converted into a slope style bike. So we have over here Kevin's slope style bike, and what it is basically is a full suspension dirt jumper. It's a little bit smaller than a trail bike. It doesn't have gears. At most, it has a few gears in the back just for changing your speed. Much stiffer suspension. It's not made for climbing. You can't raise the seat up. So why would you build a slope duro bike? Why would you take a perfectly good trail bike and turn it into a slope style bike that's not really a slope style bike? Well, for one, you do it for fun, to repurpose an old bike. And in this case, we do a lot of things on Berm Peak that we could actually use a slope duro bike for. It's more reliable because there are less things to break. It performs better on jumps. And I guess you can never have too many bikes, right? So let's get my old trail bike cleaned up. I'll start taking some parts off and I'll show you how we make this conversion. Oh yeah. All right, on to the bike wash. Oscar earned his time out. Come on, buds. So, as this bike dries off, I have some parts that I have to paint red. But I don't have to paint them red, but we're gonna do a fun color scheme because it's a slope style bike, or a slope duro bike. He's the supervisor. So slope style bikes are usually either single speed or they have like a downhill drivetrain. They're not really made for climbing. So I had this oval chain ring that's made for climbing. We're getting rid of it. We're gonna put this round one on. All right, so now, instead of a cassette on here, we're gonna put one single chain ring. My gear up front, I believe, is a 30, and so I'm gonna use a 16 tooth at the back, and that's gonna give us the gear ratio that I want to be able to sprint. You're not really gonna be able to climb with it that well. Problem is, you go and put this onto the spline of a cassette, and it can slide back and forth. I'm gonna have to put spacers in it, and those are the ones that I painted black. And we are done with the back. So I've shown in single speed videos of old that if you get the right chain length, you don't need a tensioner or anything like that. But on a full suspension bike, you pretty much always need a derailleur or a tensioner because as the suspension moves, there is what's called chain growth. So the distance between here and here actually changes. And so the chain will get loose, pop off. I have a chain tensioner. I bought this for Flip Bike, so it's a $16 chain tensioner. I have a feeling that I'm gonna be disappointed with this. It seems like there was another component to this that somehow is missing. So, I do believe we're screwed. Come here, little chain tensioner. This won't hurt that bad. We'll order a new one off of Amazon. And everything will be A-okay. Oh, I totally massacred the chain. There it goes. Where did my master link go? Honestly, probably want a better chain tensioner than this one as well, but this is gonna keep the chain tight because it's spring loaded. So we're gonna route the chain through here, up and around. We just gotta choose a length. So I'm thinking we'll let this really get tight, like there. That'll give us a little bit of space for chain growth. Now you can just gingerly sneak it on there. So now that keeps the chain nice and tight. All right, so now we have a single speed full suspension, but how are we gonna make this into a slope duro bike? First of all, the suspension needs to be much, much stiffer. On a slope style bike, it barely moves at all. It's just to absorb those really hard hits. Because when you're diving into a really steep landing, the last thing you want to happen is your suspension to compress and you go over the handlebars. And when you're pumping up a jump, you want as much of your power as possible to transfer into the bike. Too much suspension is not good. So I'm gonna put more air pressure in the fork. That's a really simple solution. And then on the rear where we have a coil, I'm gonna add a little bit more preload, but also put a heavier spring on it. This spring is a 450. I just so happen to have a 500. And now we're gonna throw the 500 on there. I'm gonna preload the urine out of this. Make sure that those pumps transfer into the suspension. It's gonna feel totally different than my trail bike. We're gonna start with 5 additional clicks and then we'll take it from there. And we especially want that slow rebound on the rear so that we don't get bucked over the handlebars. Okay, so in the event that I wanna do bar spins, I need to have an extra long brake hose so that the bars can spin around a couple of times. Hell Performance, like a year ago, sent me a bunch of braided, like, heavy duty brake lines, and they have red ones. Oh, we got no spillage. Okay, now we're dripping stuff. Now we're dripping. This is a lot more work than a normal brake hose. To like use
the tool that gives you the highest chance of injury to remove 10 millimeters of hose from the outer shell. Let me look at the instructions. This is different from the other hoses. I don't know if I'm advanced enough for this. So you push and rotate that down. Now you take this and you, wow, this is some heavy duty crap. God, it's a lot of work, but I gotta admit, it's pretty badass. I mean, look at that. Okay, so what's the next step? All right, so we'll just fill this up and then see how she works. I mean, that's kind of a miracle. I can't believe everything I went through to put this in. There's no leaks. Everything feels good. This is some nice brake hose and the fittings look really good, but man, it's a lot of work. And I gotta be perfectly honest, the red hose is an abomination. This bike originally had a 1-up EDC in it. We took out. We're just gonna run the cable through this hole that goes all the way through, and then we'll be able to spin the bars around as many times as this cable will allow. Now, as you can see, woo, 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 woo. It's so ugly. Oh, next up, seat post. So on a slope style bike, you're not climbing up hills or riding long distances. So the seat post just remains really low, so it's perfect for jumping. And the most important thing is reliability. So there's no dropper post or anything like that, unless it's Kevin's slope style bike. He put a dropper post in his. Oh man! Professional. Who wouldn't just do that on every single bike? Just match it. I don't know why Marzocchi didn't do that because, I mean, it's red. Well, I'm gonna have to see how she flies and make some adjustments, but first, I think we gotta stare at it. All right, time to shake down the suspension. A little wet out today. Actually feels pretty good. All right, let's see how she flies. She hits hard. Actually, I have the compression turned up. Let's turn off the compression and see. About to say, that's hard even for 1,000,000 PSI. Woo-hoo. It just feels so reliable. Like you take a crank, you don't have to worry about if you're in between gears. It's stiff, you can pump. I think she's ready for the trails. So quite obviously, I love the way this thing feels. That was awesome. Not so much in the rock garden, but on jumps it feels amazing. Am I gonna use it? I'll probably use it. The red brake cable is kind of growing on me. Like I said, it looks like an artery, like that was just ripped out of somebody's throat and wrapped around the bike and just all over. It looks like the bike's like veins are out. It looks immature and childish, which really is a good personality for a slope duro bike to have. This is my collection of completely absurd bicycles, and today I'm gonna tell you all about them. So first, let's talk about the freak bike fleet as a whole. Why even own freak bikes if I'm not gonna actually ride them regularly? These kind of sit in the storage unit or sit in my garage. Like for example, this swing bike stays at Squatch Bikes. If it wasn't for the novelty and the fun, there'd be no reason for me to have any of these, but not too long ago, I was living in a city and I did less mountain biking there, and so I rode my swing bike and my half bikes and my unicycle around in the street, and it was really fun to do.
So with that, some interesting facts. First of all of these bikes have Schrader valves, except for the Slingshot bike. That's the only one with Presta valves, and it's also the oldest bike here. We also have a lot of wheel sizes here. On the half bike, we've got a 20-inch wheel, and then I guess those are like 4-inch. Then we got a bunch of 26s. We have 29 over here. And the Unicycle is actually 27.5 plus. So all main wheel sizes are represented. Also, despite the fact that I'm calling these bicycles, bicycle means 2 wheels, they don't all have 2 wheels. Half bike has 3 wheels. It should be called a 1.5 bike. Unicycle has 1 wheel, but most people regard it as a bike. And there's also a bicycle here that looks really normal. It's the Kent Travail, and I'll talk about that real quick first. So as I said, the Kent Travail looks like the most normal bike of the fleet, and I could see why you would say that if you didn't see how the sausage was made. We made a lot of modifications to this. We drilled holes in the side for cables to go through. I cut the kickstand mount off with an angle grinder. And for the most part, this bike just doesn't resemble its original form at all. We bought this as a $400 Walmart bike. And because we upgraded the fork and the brakes and the bottom bracket and the drivetrain, it's actually quite capable. This is now a bike that I keep around as a loaner bike. It's a size large. I'm a size small, and so I don't have much luck riding it, but a couple of notable tidbits about this bike. First of all, the chainstay got absolutely massacred, especially during our first runs on this bike, because there's no chainstay protector on it and there was no clutch on the derailleur. So the chain was just flapping everywhere, and you can see what happens to a chainstay if you just let her rip. The other thing, we did a tubeless conversion on the rear tire. That is, we took the inner tube out and we filled it with sealant and pumped it up. I still haven't been able to find a dropper seat post that will fit into this seat tube, and so the bike is always going to be kind of limited in that regard. But if I do find a dropper post, I actually can get the cables inside the frame. There's internal cable routing in this bike, which is amazing for a department store bike. And so the Kent Travail definitely deserves a spot in the freak bike fleet because it's kind of weird. Next up, my Nimbus Oracle 27.5 Plus Mountain Unicycle. Now, this is actually the unicycle that I learned to ride a unicycle on. Still can't ride it very well, and I have fantasies that, like, someday I'm gonna spend some time on the trails with this thing and get good at it, but nah, it's probably never gonna happen. So every once in a while, I take this out of the garage and I pedal it around and I try some sketchy stuff on it, and it's fun. Yeah! This is actually probably not the easiest unicycle to ride. The smaller the wheel, the easier it is. This is 27.5 plus, and so it tends to do a few things. First of all, the larger the wheel on a unicycle, the higher your gearing is, so the harder it is to do little twitchy movements to balance. Second, this is a high volume tire, and it tends to squish down a lot, and so it's difficult to steer on pavement. It's really made to be in the dirt. This unicycle also comes with a hydraulic disc brake, which, believe it or not, is really, really useful. I can go down a pretty steep hill on this thing and keep it under control, even though I can barely ride a unicycle. Something else interesting about it, and I guess this is the case with any unicycle, the hub and the bottom bracket are sort of one piece over here. You can see this clamps down on this bearing over here, and the cranks go all the way through it. And I guess that would be kind of similar to how a Penny Farthing drivetrain would work. Now, one thing I never really learned how to do well on this unicycle was free mount. That is, just stand in the middle of a parking lot and just jump up on the unicycle. I have to kind of hold on to something to get started, or else it takes me forever. But this is an item that I will never sell or give away. I'll always have it because it's just so cool. It doesn't take up a lot of space, and it's fun to just jump on every once in a while. So this next bike I showed to you guys recently, the Slingshot bike. Never intended to keep this. I bought this for a video and
Yeah, here it is. Now, as an aside, some bikes I have just because I need to have them to run this YouTube channel. For example, I have a fat bike and I never ride it, but sometimes for a video, I need a fat bike. And after the Slingshot video, it occurred to me, sometimes I need a weird 90s bike, sometimes I need to show weird 90s components, and the Slingshot bike is a perfect example of all of this. First of all, the whole concept, it's got this flex point right over here, and then instead of a down tube, it has a cable, and it has a spring over here. I demonstrated in my video how that actually takes up some of the bumps on the trails and offers early 90s compliance. This is before rear suspension linkage became commonplace, and manufacturers were coming up with all sorts of weird ways to solve the rear suspension problem. This was one of them, and it actually rides really, really smooth. Now, on top of being able to use this bike for demonstration purposes in videos, whether I want to show an early 90s drivetrain or an early 90s fork, or just the geometry of the freaking thing, I could actually lend this out to friends and family. If somebody's visiting and we're gonna do a family greenway ride, maybe with a little bit of gravel, I don't really have to worry about this thing snapping in half. It's gonna be fine, it's easy to ride. This is a really weird bike, it's really dated, but man is it cool, and man is it a great example of such a weird beast. And so will I hold on to the Slingshot bike forever? I don't know, if bike values go back up, maybe I'll sell it on eBay, but for now, it lives here. Ow! So this next one is the half bike, and this goes way back. This was one of the first products that was like sent to me by a company to review on my channel. I don't know what to tell you about this thing. It is not fun to ride. You can't climb hills with this. It's fun to watch people try to ride it. It looks like it would be really fun, but it's not fun. Now, with that said, it's subjective. And there are people who just absolutely love these things. There's a whole half bike community. And the main thing that they say is that it's really good exercise. You're standing up on this thing. It's sort of a full body experience trying to make it work. And so I don't think there's that many people who are using this as practical transportation. Let me show you why. Okay, so you have this little crankset here, and then you have these little teeny handlebars, and they don't do anything. And you have to like tilt it to make it steer, and then it steers with the back wheels. It doesn't steer sharp. It's not particularly maneuverable, not if you compare it to a real bike. Now, despite all this, I still have the half bike because it's extremely interesting. So first of all, this part over here is actually made of wood. And I guess it makes it lightweight. It gives it some compliance. It makes it more comfortable to ride. And then the frame is this big wavy part that's made of metal. And then there's all sorts of interesting parts in between. There's this fiberglass reinforced nylon for the bottom bracket. It has 3 speeds. You don't see it. It's got a Sturmey Archer hub. So this is an internal gear hub. It's like a transmission in there. You can see the shifters right up here. You don't have to be pedaling to shift it. And so it gives you a little bit of range. And it's got these little tiny wheels on the back with little tiny tires. And then it's got 2 sides of like a caliper brake, and the brake just kind of rubs against the side of the wheel to stop it. It's really fascinating, and you see these bikes on eBay for a considerable amount of money. People want them, and so I think my opinion about it not being fun is just wrong. I hate this thing. So my main criticism of the half bike is that I don't find it fun. This has the opposite problem. It's too fun. You lend this to someone, you're never getting it back. This is the swing bike, and as you can see, it's got a pivot point right here. It's bent, they all do. Every swing bike ever made just bends right there, but it's fine, still works well. It doesn't look like it would be fun. It looks like it would just be pointlessly difficult to ride, but actually it's quite intuitive, and once you get used to it, it's just gangster. You ride this bike down the street and you lean into turns and you just whip it around, and there's literally nothing as fun. It is amazing. Now, this bike has been living at Squatch. One of their mechanics was taking it to get pizza, and he would ride back from the pizza place holding the pizza box on the swing bike, swinging it around. And he could have taken one of many high-end mountain bikes that are in the shop, but he would take the swing bike. It is, in fact, single speed. It originally came with cruiser handlebars, but Pat put some big straight mountain bike bars on it, a mountain bike stem. And yes, the pivot point here just gets bent back. You go off of curbs, you jump off some ledges, hit some doubles on it, eventually it starts bending. Every one I've ever seen is bent. This is a bike I'll never sell, I'll never give away. It's ridiculously fun. It's gonna be something I'm gonna show my kids how to ride someday. I share it with everybody who comes to visit. You gotta take a ride on the swing bike. This is like the novelty bike to end all novelty bikes.
Now this last bike is the tall bike, and it has the largest standover height of any bike I own. Now of the group, this is the only one that I actually built from scratch. I tore down 2 steel bike frames, I cut them up, I welded them together, painted the frame. I kind of invented this drivetrain system over here. I even got front and rear brakes working on it, and that's rare for tall bikes. Yes, these are common. You see tall bikes everywhere, and they're usually kind of a hodgepodge. You don't see many complete builds with gears and front and rear brakes and everything. Now, like the swing bike, this is also way, way, way fun to ride. It's much easier to ride than the swing bike. Anybody can ride this thing. You literally just mount it and ride it around like any bike. Just take your foot, put it over here. I'm 5'4", by the way, and just get on it and start riding. It's extremely, extremely intuitive. Once you're up here, it just feels like a bike. I also found out that if you ride this uphill, like even a slight hill, it just wants to flip over backwards because A, it's really tall, and B, there's 2 bike frames here, so you can see the seat tube just keeps slanting back until it's like over the rear wheel. The center of gravity's all messed up on this bike. So let me tell you some other weird things about the tall bike. So first of all, the tall bike has 4 bottle cages because it's got 2 bike frames, so of course, why wouldn't we install 4 bottle cages on it? And riding tall bikes would make you thirsty in theory because you'd only do it in like a tropical island or something. This is not a bike you want to ride if you really have someplace to go. This is also one of the only freak bikes that I keep in my garage at all times because on lunch break or if I just get bored, I grab it and ride around the driveway with it. And if somebody visits, I make them ride it. They'll be like, oh, I don't want to get broken off today. And I'm like, no, it's easy. And they all admit it. Once they get on it, they're like, yeah, it's like riding a bike. So I hope you enjoyed taking a look at all my freak bikes today. These are not bikes you see all the time. They're not bikes that I have out all the time. Like I said, the swing bike kind of lives at Squatch. This only gets lent out when people come over. The half bike, I never ride. And the unicycle, I never ride. But these bikes are still a joy to own. They're still really fun. I don't put that many miles on them, so they don't require much upkeep. And if you are a bicycle enthusiast like me, you understand why freak bikes are something fun. I hope you enjoyed this video today. I hope you learned something, and if you didn't, I hope you at least found this entertaining. Thanks for riding with me today, and I'll see you next time. Oh, now it's got dog dugan.